Okay, thank you. We'll pull the meeting to order and get going here. Our first item tonight, this is Tuesday, April 2nd, and our first item is actually a joint meeting, work session with the Architectural Review Board. Seems to be underrepresented today, but it's they're here in spirit. And the first thing was, I understand that the ARB has looked at the Monaco Realty LLC designs, and we've seen a couple of different versions, and there's been some issue as to what's approved and what's not approved. And I guess ARB thought it would be a good idea to sit down with us and talk about the plan. And I know that some of us had some concerns last time around, and we just thought it would be a good idea just to flesh this out. So Chuck's in the hot spot. Do you have those
Yeah.
the renderings? It was like 6 or 7 different renderings?
Yes.
Okay, great, fantastic.
They're also in front of you.
What's that?
They're also in front of you in hard copy.
Yeah, these renderings were not submitted as part of the planning board application. They were submitted tonight for your.
These are brand new tonight?
Yes, the brand new to the
Oh.
planning board. You have not had an opportunity to review them prior to.
Saw
Chuck
these
made.
before. These are in my packet.
There were some that were in your packet, there were new ones that were
Oh.
shown to the architectural review board with which they based, the ARB based their decision on. So I just want to be clear of what you've seen, what the public has been able to see in relation to your board,
Okay.
and kind of where we are right now.
So this grouping that we're seeing here tonight, Travis can help us with Chuck to lead us through this. These are the ones that you guys have seen before.
Yes.
But we haven't seen them before, and some of these were in the packet, some were not. Okay.
I'll just go right.
This is great, because Travis can help me here.
Yeah. What you've seen before, I'll do this one. This is what you saw before. This was the first submission.
Is this what we saw with last time we were together?
Right.
Okay.
And it had, it was a stucco connector, blah, blah, and it connected 2 buildings, and I showed it to the review board, and they absolutely killed me. It was
Not in a good way.
And
I don't think it was that bad.
And so I walked out of there, and I said, well, let's try something different.
I think that's
And so we went back.
too much.
We went back, and what we've done in this particular case is that we took the rather flat area, and we created a deeper recess. Instead of a porch overhang, we created a deeper recess for the entry into the main connector. And we create a little of a more of a vertical expression here that showed a little bit of the building on either side of it. That's number 2, where it showed a connector and it looks like something is connecting. And we gotta have it.
Oh, that one too?
Yeah.
Oh,
And so then.
it's a tough board.
But that,
No wonder why people like to come to see us.
that's progress. The first time you got killed, and then the second time you only got hammered. Yeah, I mean,
Let me,
I don't think it was that bad.
if this is the picture.
Just
of-
saying no is.
And then, this is just a perspective showing you the deep recess where we have now doors entering into this retail store and this restaurant in the under the overhang here. And so that you can go from the sidewalk up to the platform and into the business establishment. Well, it didn't work because it was masonry, and there was a problem with it being too heavy, and so we went back and tried something else, and that was this one. What we did is they had a little problem with the straight parapet or cornice, and people were suggesting some kind of ending to this vertical thing. We changed the material from stucco to siding, and I think at the last meeting that we didn't like that either. And so we came to a revised 4th revision, and in this particular case it's more, everything stays the same as far as entering at the lower level. The connector is still looking like a connector, but now we've taken the feeling of the columns that are enclosing the porch, and we carry that up, and we have a little pediment on the top. We have the big window that goes through the whole back to front hallway and stair system, and we brought some of the siding, obviously the siding, and now we make it one building instead of two separated with a connector, and that's where we are right now, and that seemed to work out. I have my signboards here. We changed the lights. They requested light changes, and we've got some two down lights for the signboards, so people on the sidewalk know that there's the front door, and there's a front door, and on the other side there's another front door to get into it. And this is what was eventually approved, which is, I think, a bigger step from, I think it's a bigger step from that one.
Yeah, I think it shows the design as it progressed from I think it was 3 meetings. Was it 3 meetings?
Yeah,
Did you?
yeah.
So it was a good working session with that to get to the final solution here. So it's a very tough project. I've only lived here a couple of years, and I'm not even sure if I've seen kind of an example of this being done anywhere to begin with. So it's a unique design problem, and it's tough. It's really tough to do, actually.
Well, I treated it as I treated it wrong from the beginning. I treated it as a connector that was, nothing more than a plain. I used the description of Siamese twin. I have 2 twins, and now I made them Siamese, and that didn't go over very well. But
Interesting architectural technique.
I,
Who would've thought?
so technically, it's still a connector, but there's a lot more action on the front. There's a lot more scale, and it has a primary scale. Let's go back to that.
I think we were both trying to work through what this was even supposed to look like to begin with. So
Did you, just for point of information, did you give approval to the project yet?
yes, it was.
You have approved this?
Yes, and I wasn't a part of the approval meeting, but I was a part of the every other meeting.
Where
that
does,
he came.
where
So-
does,
They're
and I
not
think
on approval yet.
where does your
It
memo
went- it
come
went-
from?
I'm sorry, let's get the approval thing straight. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I'm gonna talk about the approval a minute, because at this point.
I'm talking
as
about
it-
the Architecture Review Board.
Well, the Architectural Review Board approved it, but it went to them on a referral to come back to you.
Okay.
So they approved the design up to the point where it comes back to you. The applicant, once the planning board approves it, the applicant, as part of the building permit process, will then go back to the ARB
Okay.
for the final approval prior to construction. So
So
it
this is
really wasn't an approval.
Got it.
It was more of a referral back to
Preliminary.
you. Preliminary
Maybe-
approval.
maybe that's what it should
Exactly.
have been, a
And
preliminary.
as a point
Right.
of information, and this is something that I took a deeper dive into when I was doing my review after I saw some of the changes and whatnot, because I was privy to what the Architectural Review Board was reviewing, is I pulled out the Millwood Design Guidelines. And the Millwood Design Guidelines go into great detail regarding this type of application in Millwood. And it gets into needs within the parking area that was along that is behind the building. And it gets into specific architectural detailing of the building and, particularly connectors. And because this is a unique situation where there's existing buildings and we're connecting them versus new construction, the guidelines say try and incorporate as much of the guidelines as possible into the construction that you're doing
Is
on
there,
the
is
site.
there, because this is so long ago, is there actually a text in the guidelines that deals specifically with connectors?
Text regarding flat stucco treatment, regarding roof angles.
Okay.
There is specificity about the way
Right.
the front should look.
But, I knew all that, but
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah, specifically regarding
Connect-
material
connectors would
treatment,
be
flat roofs
really
are
special.
first.
So is your
That's
memo
because I
is in
didn't-
response to which version?
My memo is a response to the last version the planning board saw.
The last
Oh.
version the planning board saw?
Not this,
Okay.
not
I can tell you that looking at this one, I don't think that many of those tenants are being met in this one as well.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you.
And I could tell you what
this was probably-
my understanding is that although I would say it would be that line, which is a parapet of some sort, because all the equipment is up there. And you need a little parapet to keep the firemen from falling over, so forth. But anyway, it's that line that seems to be the trouble. What I think the guidelines are saying is that we don't want a long front building. By the way, this doesn't fit into the category of the long front building, because it's less than 50% of the coverage. We're only adding 22% coverage to the two buildings. But do believe, if I were gonna design a long front building with a flat roof, that would definitely be totally out of character with what the guidelines are looking for.
I believe, Chuck, there's several different aspects of the guidelines. One is the length of the building and its frontage, how long it
Yeah.
is. There are other specific details different than that length regarding the styling of the rooftops.
Yeah.
The guidelines say parapets are not allowed. They want slopes on the roofs, and particularly, there's references in the language of the guidelines regarding this type of treatment where you're adding on to. And so, I am not the architect. The tenants, because this is less than 50% of the existing building coverage on site, the rule of thumb is to try and incorporate as many of the guidelines as you can. I am uncertain at this point, not being an architect, and I would defer to the Architectural Review Board. Does this meet as much as it possibly can with the design guidelines?
So I'd like to make just a comment about design guidelines.
Right.
And what they can be expected to do, what they're intended to do, and what they shouldn't be expected to do. Design guidelines really are not meant to, if one expects them to achieve actually excellent design, then they're fishing in the wrong stream.
They're not guidelines, they're rules.
Then those would be specific stipulations of specific, and because every design problem is different pretty much, you can't do that anyway. What design guidelines are intended to do is to protect from a bad solution. And so it provides guidelines to deal with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think at the same time, that if you meet every stipulation of the detail of a design guideline, that you necessarily therefore have a good design, right? It's all in the way in which those elements are put together that achieves the, right?
Yeah, that's,
And so when I gotta tell you, I'm looking at this flat front with the two-story pilasters framing the entranceway, and the parapet, and these two gabled buildings on either side, and I feel like it's sort of like a Wild West Main Street. It's like I've gone to Tombstone, Arizona, and which is a charming, no doubt is a charming, and was back then. It wasn't ever intended to be that charming, but that's just the way people built back then. To me, this character still doesn't get us there. I see two completely different design choices in one building. And I also, I understand the programmatic desire to put the porches out front. I'm not sure that the scale of those porches goes so well with the two buildings on the back, but the two buildings on the side, but when we talked about this originally, Chuck, I asked, why wouldn't you make these into three gabled buildings like a row house?
I think so.
A grouping of three row houses. Appearance of that. Put a gable in the middle.
well, yeah, but, there,
Chuck, can you go back to the previous design, this one with you kinda had it with over
It was
the
a
door,
baby
you had the
gable.
third.
Maybe like a lump.
Yeah, the bump.
At the entry.
I might help Tom explain what he's,
No, that doesn't,
doesn't help you?
no, what Tom is looking for is, I do
Full-size
believe,
gable.
Yeah, full size.
I think what Tom is looking for is more of this.
Yeah,
which,
Yeah, there are
I,
porches there.
you know, and which
Not of
actually.
that scale, but three
But,
gable fronts.
but that's what you're looking for, and I'm saying that, that's a house behind that window, and that's a house behind that window, and that's a house behind that window. Over here, in this middle, I have stairways and bathrooms and corridors that are all functioning to serve either building. So form might follow function, form might follow function in the way it appears on the outside, but not to decorate it to look like that.
Well, I'm sorry, but
problem
every
with
house has stairs and has, all of the things you just mentioned, has stairs, and it is wrapped in, typically, those elements are wrapped in a complete architecture, which looks
Well,
like a
in
house.
this case, I'd have to
So,
have a stairway, a
Form
bathroom,
doesn't
and
necessarily
kitchen.
follow function with respect to the exterior let me finish, exterior massing of a house necessarily, especially with regard to those interior elements. For a house, those things are normally buried within the volume
Right.
and then wrapped with an architecture which is pleasing.
And what I did is I put all of those things, all of those functions, all of those stairs, all of those bathrooms, all those future kitchens, all of the handicap bathroom, I put them in the middle. And that particular utility has, in my mind, it's not a store, it's not a restaurant, it's not an office, it's a stairway and a hallway and a bunch of bathrooms that function to serve both sides of this. Should that want to be an apartment, the bathrooms are in that area waiting for it right now.
That argument works, I think, that principle works when the consequence of using that principle is a pleasing building. I mean, that actually sort of makes sense. In this particular case, the principle doesn't yield, I think, within the context of the street and our town, doesn't actually deliver a pleasing building. So I wonder if one needs to go back and re-examine the premise and try again. I mean, maybe working from the outside in is
Well,
the way it ought to be approached, could be approached here.
Well, what we're looking to do is to create as much open space in these buildings, both of them, second floor and first floor.
But I'm just talking about a roof line. That's all I'm talking about. Everything underneath that roof line, none of it has to change.
But the architect in me says that I have a totally different function in the middle of that building. And I do believe it should have a totally different expression.
Well, the architect and me
Well, I don't know.
disagrees with that.
Well,
But we don't have to agree. I'm just giving my opinions
Yeah.
to the board here and to you.
well, I know one thing, if I had to look at any more of those things, I'm not happy with the way that looks. And to create to create another row house in the middle, it's only 15 feet wide. I mean, to get stairways and bathrooms in there, it's almost impractical to develop that interior. It's only,
I'm not talking about changing the interior of the building. I'm just talking about changing the roof line.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really structurally that simple, right? And so, I mean, I don't understand, I understand the principle. I don't understand the resistance to another idea, which I think, in my opinion, yields a better result.
well,
We just disagree.
I think we do, yeah. I love the idea of that building that has a flat roof with a generator on it and all of the air conditioning equipment and the access to the roof. All of that utility stuff matches the utility stuff that's totally underneath it. I mean, it's a pure expression.
But this is not a pure building.
What?
The
No.
result is not pure.
Why? Well,
Look
You're
at
gonna
it.
conclude-
Well, put it back up. I'm sorry.
Well,
We're
they're single
Chuck,
family housing.
your
They're single-family house right
I
now
understand your
that we're trying to
philosophy
turn into something completely
and how you
different.
want it. I understand your philosophy about wanting to express a different
which one do you
architecture.
want to see?
You put it where you
latest
want.
The one that the review board looked at.
I just don't think your
Last one.
solution supports your philosophy.
And the solution of.
Your solution of, you know what, I have these two existing buildings, I'm creating a new object in the middle, I want to express the object in the middle differently. Okay, I can understand your position on that, but I don't think your solution expresses it properly. Like, if you did a glass jewel box there, I would support that more than that.
Me too.
Because it'd be so radically different. But I know you can't do a glass jewel box there, but you understand
Well,
what
it
I'm
was
saying?
suggested.
I think that was, and I think in our first couple meetings, I think a lot of the expression from the review board was, we would like to see that as a more transparent piece. I think it maybe harkens back to the, and this is a stretch, but the kind of the doghouse, where you've got the doghouse type, where you've got the breezeway kind of through the between the two functions.
That would be an elegant solution.
In there, and I think we were trying to express that in the first couple meetings that I was at least. I was not at this final meeting, but I think that was part of some of the feedback that I think we gave, and just like you said, I think it was maybe even mentioned to do some type of a glass solution or
That's a good idea.
something to that effect, but.
Well, if we're going to work in a historic vocabulary, which actually a glass solution is historic also these days, but work in a historic vocabulary, you're mixing two different vocabularies that to me don't belong together. That's all.
Well, if you want to talk about historic, what is the accepted standard practice is that you don't try to make the new thing look like the old one. You do want to keep it different.
Okay.
And so,
Right.
and the glass would work,
Yeah.
or something else would work.
The reason
You
the
know-
glass works is because it's entirely neutral.
Well-
It's transparent, it's entirely neutral with respect to the two sides. This is what happened when four architects get together, it's a conversation that just gets
Well-
like circular very quickly.
Very quickly.
So,
But
this is my
Personally, I'm
opinion.
looking forward to talking about septic tanks again soon.
Yeah, right. Well, I
Sorry to hear that.
I do want to go, if I may regress.
Stay.
No, it's
I mean, the essence of a stucco finish, even maybe with the right color, was totally different material, totally different. But somehow or another, stucco is not allowed in the Millwood area design plan, even though most of the buildings in Millwood are stucco.
Is stucco not allowed or ephes?
It specifically says stucco.
Oh, okay.
I mean, but here's the thing, I mean, Tom points out a really good point. It's about their guidelines, there's provisions within the code for the Millwood Center design guidelines, which give the planning board the authority to alter based on unique characteristics. So it is all about coming up with a design that you think is representative of what the design guidelines were setting forth, that meets some of the major tenets of the guidelines, but it doesn't need to meet every single one. There's other aspects of those design guidelines that move beyond architecture and deal with the site treatment.
We have that next, okay?
Correct, but I think that the board has purview to make changes as long as they're in keeping with the feel and context.
So what I would do, this is where I am on this. I've offered you my opinion, everybody my opinion, right? And that's my opinion. And I actually think that the conclusion of this is within the purview of another board.
Yeah.
And unless I'm mistaken, it's properly placed there. And my comments go to that board and to you.
Okay.
And I'm sort of done with it now.
If I could add to that real quickly, the code does not reference the ARB as having the approval authority or the amendment authority under the design guidelines. So straying from those design guidelines under key aspects that are referenced in those guidelines that are codified has to come from this board, okay? Or it has to be referenced in your approvals as to why you approve of, let's use stucco for an example, and that even though the design guidelines say no, you feel based on whatever it is, and then you defer the final to ARB.
So the question to you would be, is there anything in this proposal which specifically is counter to the design guidelines? I'm guessing that there is not.
There is.
Okay.
There is, and I had outlined for you in my memo, my second memo,
Yep.
under other visual principles on page 2, the recommendations in colors, the use of awnings, the use of vertical emphasis rather than horizontal emphasis in building elevations. Sloped roof lines, not flat roofs and parapets. They're specifically stated as not being acceptable. The Millwood Design Guides recommend treatment of buildings with horizontal wood siding, wood shingles, standard brick, or board and batten. Treatment with stucco or concrete block is not acceptable. So there's other details, I did not enumerate them all. I actually provided the ARB with a copy of the design guidelines so they could see the specific detailing in the guidelines themselves. The applicant should be familiar with them, can come and get them, look at them, and try and meet as many as the tenants that this board feels he should. Where you want to give the leeway, you should give him that direction.
I have a question about the horizontal emphasis. The horizontal emphasis is, it's like rather than, so you're looking for verticality, but the verticality is only 22% of the fascia, or something like that, so that, to me, it's not driving the whole bus on fascia. And so I don't see why that one is pertinent. The stucco can be changed to something else. And, the colors and everything, I think that's all doable. So let me ask you a question, having said that. On your roof, on your parapeted roof, what percentage of the flat roof is going to be taken up with equipment, AC and whatever else?
Well, we have 6 air,
Exchange handlers,
not air handlers,
exchangers, and
heat exchangers or whatever those things are. We have, and they're about this big each. We only have 300 feet of roof, flat roof.
Yeah.
And so there's, and in the middle, we, based on what the BAR wanted, we put a big skylight to drop light down through the stairwell. So, so to answer your question, there's a generator up there, and 6 air handlers and a skylight.
Do you have a roof hatch to get up?
Yeah, and a roof hatch. Yeah, the roof hatch comes from, so, well, anyway, so I would say half.
Okay, so, because my thought is that, you had a small rise,
Yeah.
which didn't look like much. What if you had a full one, and then you had in essence, a partial roof that was flat behind it, so you had something that was maybe 6 foot wide, and you could store stuff in it, the hatch could even be through that or whatever, but, so you'd have something that way that changed the visual aspect, not entirely, but much more than the parapet being like it is, and much more than this much smaller vertical area. I think that, putting in the columns and everything does address the verticality. So I think that's important to keep. But I think that there's a way to do it, make the skylight smaller. I mean, one of the things you said before, too, another point, you said if that left-hand one, for instance, is turned into an apartment, the bathrooms would still be in the hallway.
No, the bathroom.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, I'll show you.
I mean, we could say, don't change it into an apartment.
Yeah. Here is the top floor is now
Okay, I see.
slated for
So there,
office. Those bathrooms, right
okay,
there.
so both offices have their own private bathrooms.
Right,
And on the first floor, you have bathrooms that are
yeah.
open to the hallway? How?
Only one,
Is that your conforming bathroom on the first
that
floor?
is the handicap bathroom, right there.
Okay,
And this retail has this, and this restaurant has its 2 bathrooms.
okay. And the handicap one would be available to everybody?
That's everybody on the
Fine.
first floor after they get
So-
up this ramp, yeah.
You know, that's my 2 cents as to what it is. And it would partially address the verticality beyond what verticality has already been introduced. It would break up the hole in it. You don't have to run this roof all the way to the back because the back is basically screened from other houses and everything.
Yeah.
There's no road back there.
Yeah,
And it could be, like I said, a storage area.
yeah.
So my isometric drawing isn't much, but you can have that.
Well, but you still go all the way across.
Yeah, I go all the way across.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm objecting to, making triplets out of the thing.
Well-
That's my problem. Because then it starts looking like that.
Well,
No, I don't think
It
so.
does not, but I'm sorry.
Well,
That's
well,
not, that's
it
not
ain't-
fair
well, no, when you look at
representation
three
of what it
roofs.
could be.
When you
No, I
look at the
understand that.
roofs.
We did, there were, unless I'm mistaken, on Station Road right now, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
now, there's a comment, legitimate concerns about how maybe we allowed those to be 3 stories, and it should have been a mix of 2 and 3.
Yeah.
But 3 row houses, 4, 5, 6 row houses with gabled ends
Bingo.
is a perfectly common and perfectly acceptable building type in just about every city in this country.
And,
And if you have a specific objection to it, then you do. But
well, I'd like to,
it's not,
it's
so
not
it's
an
architecturally
objection.
unacceptable.
It's more of an expression of what's going on in the building. And if you go up to Chappaqua Crossing, you see a couple of buildings building a flat roof, couple of buildings, flat roof. That's all this is.
Okay.
Couple of buildings with a flat roof, just like the crossing. I mean, it's
Well,
like,
but it
relieves it, and it doesn't have this
No,
big, long thing.
I disagree. For me, I'm not an architect, I'm just an engineer, so it's discordant to me to have a
what?
flat roof.
What was the word?
Discordant.
Okay.
I have some others for later.
Well-educated engineer.
Let me get the dictionary.
So I don't have a problem with the other buildings. You know, certainly this aerial view is not as attractive for those buildings as a ground level view. I consider that this row of apartments is well manicured, well, landscaped and everything else, and works. And the parking in the back is great. There's so many things about those 6, let's say, buildings that I think are positive.
Well, they're all apartments, and this is an industrial building.
No.
Not industrial, but a commercial building, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Should we go to the back and talk about can we go to the back? Oh, wait, I don't wanna.
The back of what?
Sabrina talks about some
Back to the
parking.
future, or-
Parking.
Well, I think, why don't we finish up on this so
Yeah.
we can try to give Travis the rest of the night off and also get some information over to BAR, ARB, and so that we are, supplying you guys with some guidance. So I guess we've heard from Tom and Greg and Dick. I think there's some good comments, and of course Sabrina's told you in terms of, and you got the comments, what the guidelines are, so.
I'm sorry, I know I said it was going to be quiet, but you know that I
We
can't.
knew better.
But
Forgive me, Chuck.
But he lasted 2 minutes.
I know how you
I've been squirming. Could you go back to your elevation again? Sorry. The collision of style that I'm talking about, the center piece and the 2 ends, the 2 side pieces, is a collision between what I read as the centered Federalist style elevation and the 2 ends being sort of more, the vertical pilasters. I understand Dick's comment about how that can help solve verticality, and it does create a verticality, but to me, it's inappropriate in scale, it's inappropriate in style.
Yeah.
There are other ways to create that verticality with respect to the shape of windows and all those other things.
Let me do this one, if you don't mind, to get rid of some of that, oops, sorry, just to get rid of some of that, trim work and all of that other stuff. Now, this is a stucco finish, but it's a vertical, it has something of a masonry feel because of that header across the top.
Yeah, but that
It
square
doesn't-
window is not working.
And,
Yeah, I'd do 2 double hungs before I did 1 big square fix.
but, yeah, if that material, if we were able to color that material, one of the primary colors of the building, We eliminate all of this extra stuff that's on there, we get it cleaner and simpler. That could be glass or it could be some other crisp material. And you notice the corners, there's no trim, none of that stuff. It's clean and simple.
That's not,
And
I'm sorry, I don't see that as being clean and simple at all. I just don't.
What do you think about it with the stucco finished look? If it had different window treatments or?
And I think some of the main comments from when we saw this was the transparency part of the,
Well, stucco was, everybody said it's a masonry building, it's heavy.
Yeah, I would really want you all, before you make a decision regarding the stucco, is to review the guidelines. I really would.
But I think Tom had a good point, that guidelines help get you where you want to go, but if you take guidelines and you apply them to a particular problem where the guidelines don't perhaps address that problem very well, you have to look for a different solution that fits the problem that you have.
And listen, my point in having you refer to the guidelines is not specifically to get the guidelines, but to understand the context within which those guidelines were written.
You don't look for different guidelines. What you do is, working within the guidelines, you look for a different solution. You don't change the guidelines in order to find a solution. It's just working with what you've got in order to do it. And some guidelines are very strict, and that's where you get to dictating design, and that's always dangerous, I think. And the good ones sort of try and bridge the gap between trying to establish a character of a community, but allow invention at the same time.
I think the guidelines were written to stop something.
Right. And they were written to stop stucco, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, well, I understand.
Okay.
But I was showing you this example of something without all the trim and all the colors.
Right,
and
right.
all.
Cleaner look.
A cleaner, simpler look. If that were done in vertical wood, like a teak or something like that, or some other material other than shingles and horizontal siding, it might have a cleaner, crisper, simpler look. But
We
you're on the
will
roof.
disagree about these things
You're on the
until
roof.
the cows come home. But I don't see that as a clean look, because I think the proportions are so discordant that it creates its own sort of noise. So, what is, Sabrina, you want to give us guidance on where we go now in this discussion? You're suggesting we go
Well,
back to the
there's
guidelines before we do any more on it?
Well, if you want to keep talking about the architecture, I think you're kind of beyond that. But I would really like to point out the guidelines talk about on-street parking. Chuck, I'd say, can you please talk to us about on-street parking? And if you don't want on-street parking, why not? What's the road width? There's specific measurements as to travelway versus area for parking. That information should be provided. I think the best direction for the board to give to the applicant tonight is to go back, look at your design and look at the tenets of those guidelines and address what you feel you can do versus what you cannot do. I don't know, Chuck, if you want to bring up the site plan with the parking lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to get this thing to work. Oh, it
Yeah,
doesn't
there's
go on the bottom.
specific language within the guidelines regarding no more than 7 to 10 cars without a planting area in between, trying to break up the space. And granted, it's behind the building, and there seems to be reference that behind the building isn't that important. But the guidelines talk about creating, more comfortable pedestrian type of environments. There's also points in the guidelines about connecting properties where possible, and at one point the board was discussing with the applicant the connection with the property next door or a future connection with the property next door through the parking lot. So I think that Chuck, you can speak to some of that tonight, but I really think that the board would want you to go back and review the guidelines and talk to those things that you think you can accomplish and that you don't want to accomplish, and kind of give them information on that, because again, it's about
I think you've done enough, give information. I mean, I think you talk about parking, you talk about the
If you
sight
feel
lines,
I provided you enough.
Yeah, I read that memo and it's great.
But I also think one other point that I want to make before Chuck talks about these things is that specifically in his land banking area, that street approach and the planting that's there is important to bring the site into conformance with its space. If that land bank parking is realized, that landscaping will be removed and it will be parking.
to here,
Right.
only to here.
Well, there's some question as to whether or not even that parking is realistic, because the spots are so close to the entrance, it's just,
This
potentially
is road-
dangerous.
No, this is roadway, there's
Yeah, I
plenty of
understand.
room from there to there.
Yeah, but you start within, what, 15, 20 feet, and you have some parking spaces there. So they're configured, obviously, they're land banks, so that we're not gonna see them initially. But to Sabrina's point, are they really realistic or not? I don't know, I don't think so. If they have to be used. Hopefully they don't.
Well, yeah.
But that's why
it's
we were
hard to
talking
say.
about the neighboring property, right, which was under the same owner? That's why we were talking about having that little bridge between the properties and complementary
And he
parking?
did not, he wasn't
Oh,
going
he
to
changed
give
his mind,
permission. on that. At one time, we had everybody coming in there and going out there.
Well, it wasn't that, it was just that there was a connection so that, overflow.
extra parking.
Yes, yes.
I suspect if there is extra parking, there'll be a pathway.
And that was driven because we didn't want people poaching the spots across the street.
Correct.
Yeah,
from the
we heard about
lumberyard.
that from the
Yeah.
neighbor, yes. But I think that the adjacent property owner, which is the same owner, I think,
It is.
there was some talk about opening that up.
The objection to that might be, and it would be our concern as well, I think, is that currently it's the same property owner. But if at another point in time, the property, one of the properties gets sold, there's then an encumbrance in the
Yep.
sale that somebody needs to, would somehow have to be dealt with. And I wonder if that would be a mistake to impose on this applicant.
What it says is that you're within 250 feet of the site, you can have permission to use some of the parking. It's not necessarily a walkthrough or a crash-through. I do believe I can handle all of the parking that's required on the site, even with that issue you brought up. For example, there's a spot right there that's not even being used. I take that one right there and put it right there, should we need it. There's also room right here on either side. But I wanted to, while we're talking about relocating parking, I mean, it says 5 to 10, or 7 to 10 spaces before you have an island. What happened?
I don't know how you back out of that spot that you just created at the end there.
This,
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I don't know how you back out of that one safely.
Well, you back all the way out to here, you got
Usually
28
when you
feet.
back out, you want to try and turn your car a little bit,
Well,
and there you're
no.
gonna turn it right into the
Well, you
shrubbery.
got 26 feet radius. Well,
Like that.
yeah, I think it'll work. The other thing that we can, well,
It's not
anyways,
even-
that is,
24
should it
feet
ever
wide,
be
there's about
needed?
22 feet wide.
Make it, you could always make it a parking space for a short car, a small car. That way it definitely would have no problems getting out.
Into other issues was that this is 11 cars. And what we've done is we've made a whole bunch of islands. We've clustered all our islands in one spot in order to reduce the amount of pavement. And so if I had to, I move that little car over 6 feet, I put an island in the middle, we're done with that, should that be needed. But if it says 7 to 10 cars, this is 11 cars. I mean, does the guideline say you're not allowed to have the 11th car before you, in the back of a building?
It says 7 to 10.
Just 7 to 10.
7 to 10.
7 to 10.
So if
7
you
to
have
10.
10, you have to put a thing in.
So put an
Or
island
if you
in
have
and move it.
7 and the board decides, you put
Why
a
not?
thing in.
And so the question I have is are these guidelines that restrictive by 8 feet?
Yep.
Well,
My read of it is yes. I mean, it wouldn't be in there the way it's written if they thought otherwise.
It might help us if you can embrace more of the easier ones,
Yeah,
so
so
that when you come back with
That's
some of the
easy,
tougher
right?
ones.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, that's an easy one,
let's do
right?
it.
That's a gimme, that's,
Yeah, and here's another,
tee it
here's
up
one,
for you.
two, here's 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
5, 6, 7, boom, there's the island. Somebody calls it a bump out, but it's
That's
an
not a-
island.
it's-
It's a big island. And so I think, I'm wondering that if we can move that over, create that one, we've handled the issue of,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, easy
Yeah,
enough.
listen, I don't, Chuck, you have to understand that the guidelines are just that. We want you to try to do the best you can to meet them.
Well, yeah, the best I can is to put all my buffer and all
That's
of my
not really
things
the
there.
intention. That's
Yeah.
not the intention, Chuck.
Let's see, the other thing is that should this ever not be a restaurant, we only need 25 cars. because this is taking up an awful lot of space, plus the outdoor eating is taking up a whole bunch of space.
Yep.
And so there's this, and we haven't even looked at the, you know, the lunchtime, the dinner time, and all of that stuff. But I do believe the 11-car land banking does take into account that.
Yeah, I think we were talking about all that.
Yeah,
It's okay, I mean, again, I think the land banking that you've got here is probably workable.
Yeah.
But if there are changes and it doesn't seem to work and next door is unavailable and we have some overflow and complaints about parking somewhere else, then we may have to look at it.
Yeah. There's something else about this land banking, because underneath that grass and underneath all of this turf is supposed to be a parking lot ready to be paved.
Yep.
And I would choose not to do that now. I would rather it be turf and
Yeah.
watered and all that other stuff. That would be something that,
We do that, right?
you do it, but it doesn't go unnoticed.
well,
That it's a variation from what the definition of
Right.
land
I'm
banking.
making that request in order to have, again, as much lawn
Yeah,
turf
sure,
as possible.
sure. I think it makes good sense.
Yeah. And I think sightlines was discussed, and Michael has a better picture. He's drawn all the sightlines, but we have to put our car right here, our head has to be here, and we have to look down the road at cars coming. This sightline out of this driveway, based on DOT specifications, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but the DOT said that sightline has to be cleared, so it eliminated
So is that the on-street
on-street
parking issue
parking, yeah.
that Sabrina raised?
Similarly this way, too. Not, the problem here isn't this guy looking this way, it's this guy coming out right here looking that way also. There's an exit from that other parking lot. So,
So how about in front of the building?
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Missed something here, Chuck, I'm sorry. The sight lines, because that's on-street parking there, the sight lines are compromised.
yeah, the location.
Right, and so what's the solution? Is there,
No parking. That's all those stripes saying no parking. I would love it to be a
why,
temporary
why,
loading zone.
why, okay, now why would the town think that that was a good thing? I don't understand that. This street was designed for on-street parking for a particular reason. The
Correct.
cross-section of the street was designed that way. And if the definition of the point of where the site is taken from, Bob, is traditionally at that point in the driveway, distant from where the curb cut is and where the street line is,
Generally speaking, DOT,
then, I'm sorry.
generally speaking, DOT, I was just going through the San Aurelius, they like to come back about 14 and a half feet back from the travel lane.
From the travel lane.
Yeah, and that's way back here.
Now,
No, the
that's,
travel lane is
Travel lane is
down
here.
Yeah.
14 feet back is there. This is only 10
so,
and another
so
4
what
your
kind of a
eyeball.
sight line do we get there?
It would still impact the cars that would be parked there. You wouldn't have to eliminate all the cars, but anything within that site distance triangle,
It's all the cars.
So,
Mike,
right, Mike?
will you-
that you show on it.
It's all the cars. No,
All cars.
just-
All the cars?
Yeah.
And, you
There's
know,
not that many there. There's like.
again, DOT in their infinite wisdom will be the approving authority on this, but whatever is in that sightline triangle would not have to be there, it'd have to be removed. Albeit cars, plantings, trees, anything.
that's insane. I mean, this is one of these things where these regulations that come out of a bunch of guys sitting somewhere, they really don't help us build cities and build towns. That's just nuts to me. It's just as
Is that 120 there? Is that the state road?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, it
This road,
is.
this is 133, yeah.
133, not 120, okay. Okay,
Absolutely.
right,
It's a
right.
state
road.
Yeah,
Oh, is
Make
that
the
why?
final say
Because
on
it's
it.
133?
It's 133, yeah.
And a matter of fact, they'll have to get a state permit for that opening, and they'll be looking at the sightlines quite closely.
That's crazy.
want to go to the next level of problem?
Before we leave this,
Yeah.
I can understand why this is crowded visually because of this, and 2 cars there, you don't get by it. Now, if this were open, well, then your sight line is different, and I don't see why this can't be.
Yeah, well, you're parked here, because
Yeah.
you're coming out, and your eyes have to go down.
They
You
don't
need
have
a
to
guy
go- yeah,
500
that's-
feet down
That's
the
the
road.
question. Do your eyes have to see all the way here, or can they just see enough to get past the cars and through the window glass or
No.
something? But
It would have to be at the height they use
Three
Yeah,
feet,
for
for this
three
type
and a
of
half
3.5 feet, 3.5 each way.
That's where your
That's
eye
what they
level
consider
is.
the eye level in a car. I believe that's what Michael demonstrated too on his plans.
Yeah.
How did they come up with 14 feet? I mean, where's that number come from?
Well, it has to
Of
do
course,
with,
it's like.
Good question,
8
I don't know,
feet,
they
you
just come up with it, it's an AASHTO and the state uses it.
No, I'm sure it's in the books.
well, I am too, because it's a state highway, the speed limit is different. And if the speed limit is different, then your sight lines have to be longer. If this were on a residential street, if you would,
But the vision point is 14 feet back, right?
right?
That is
Right,
correct.
so that has, I don't understand why that has anything to do with the
I think
speed
Michael
of the
has it
road.
drawn out.
Isn't
actually,
the speed
on
limit
his
still
plan.
30 miles per hour on that?
I believe it's 30,
Yeah.
but the state and everything will always go by prevailing speed limit, which is usually higher
Particularly there.
Oh, yeah,
than
absolutely.
30. It might be 35, 40.
But that affects the angle, right? Of how far
That's going
down
to
the
require
road.
more sight distance.
Right, but the point of vision isn't
Remain
affected
the
by
same.
that. Remains the same, right.
Yes. And the 3.5 remains the same. The only thing that would increase would be the sight distance because of the increased speed.
Why can't the driveway be extended? Is that, I guess that's right away, is that it?
That's state right away.
So
State
you can't
right away.
extend it, huh, into the parking, then you're, it's almost like one of those calming things that you have with pedestrians in towns.
Yeah, yeah.
Just have the road come out further so then you can use the
Well,
parking.
you know what? That's not a bad idea. Maybe you might want to convince the state of that. They have like a bump out.
Yeah, like
then you
a
can-
car bump out.
Or a bump.
How would that make a difference, though, in the sign?
Uh,
Maybe
you
you're out
still have to
14
come
feet
back.
closer to the road.
Because
You
you're
still have to be
protecting
14
the
feet
Still
back from the right
Still
of
from the
way.
right of way.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
travel lane,
Yeah.
the travel lane.
Yeah, the travel lane is the fog line.
And I'm assuming
Yeah,
it's
but
the
you're
edge of
gonna
the
be,
travel
you're gonna
lane,
be
not
out on the
center.
edge at that point, so, I mean, you
Well,
just
here's
have
the
more.
fog line right there. And you have to be 14 feet back, no matter what's going on here, you still have to be 14.
Yeah, the bump outs would help.
Okay.
If you had
Bump outs
more-
are interesting.
Well, you have to get the waiver
The
of the
reason they
14
put the
feet.
bump outs in is
Yes,
to help the
You're trying
pedestrians.
to
for the
apply
sight
logic
lines.
here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not the
Sorry.
automobile.
Big mistake.
Exactly.
Well, that's what happens when they write stuff
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense.
Yes, they often do.
Well, it makes sense, but it's just not universal sense for all circumstances.
Let's get to another item, lighting, site lighting. And the guidelines say something about 90 CRI and
Yeah, well, it's
2500.
dated before
That's
LEDs.
so outdated.
Yeah, yeah,
It is.
That's from
It
the early
is.
90s when we
Uh,
had kerosene lanterns.
okay. Well,
Yes.
Charleston field.
what,
No, that's actually an incandescent bulb, is 90.
Right.
Traditional incandescent bulbs, but they don't make those anymore.
Matter of fact, I remember some meetings we had and the planning board decided these things are so outdated, they should come up with new regs
Yes.
on it.
yeah, well,
We did that a long time ago, too.
Yeah.
here is the CRI index of, I don't know, how colors are rendered to your eye. And you can see the number 0 to 100. 100, I think, is a incandescent bulb.
No,
I think. Is it that
the
something?
100 is sunlight.
Sunlight? Oh, daylight. Oh, yeah, there it is. Right, daylight.
It's sun on an object.
Yeah.
That's-
And so the number that we have, somebody wrote down a while ago, said it has to be 90. In neonatal rooms in the hospital is 90. But anywhere from 85
I
to
didn't know
60.
that.
This is
Yes.
very interesting
Found
information.
that out. It has
What
to
else
be.
you got?
You
Is this
gotta,
next
you wanna make sure that
door?
baby's not blue, you know, or whatever. You gotta be real careful with color and how it's rendered. But I'm saying that, you know, why we're using 90,
You'll never come back.
I would like to, some considerations on not using 90.
But aren't you gonna use LEDs?
We are out, this is LED.
Well, okay, yeah, okay.
And so I have an LED fixture of 80. And what's very interesting is that if you go home tonight, go by Kip Street, we have all our new lights up on Kip Street that we've ordered. The K rating is 2,700, not
Good.
2,500. And the CRI is in the 80s, like 82 or
Which is
80,
very
so
good.
very
These
there,
days, that's very good.
So what I am suggesting that you consider is that we have an 80, our light fixtures in the parking lot are 80, and the the Kelvin temperature is
3,000.
3,000. And let me show you something else about that. And
Why not just go to 2,700?
because I can't get a bulb, number one, I can't get a 2,500 bulb.
Don't asking that.
And the 2,700 does not fit the fixture that I chose. And
Okay,
I'm going from a design type fixture that I like, and it has
Is
a
this
color.
another problem with the?
So here's the difference.
Architectural
Here's some
self-imposed.
pictures, just for your consideration. There's 2,700, there's 3,000. There's also another picture.
we have, Chuck, you may not know, but a couple of years ago, we went through a thorough, exhaustive, technical review.
All kinds of bulbs tested outside.
Bulbs tested, we did all of that.
Yeah, we
And
did it. We had somebody who was an expert, and after he was done, 2 weeks later, he left and went to London.
Well, I'm showing you this
Doesn't bode well
because
for you.
this is 2,700 to 3,000, and it's in the warm category.
Right.
It fits the incandescent, and I'm saying, does that work for you? That's your call. Because our bulb is 3,000, it fits that warm category, and it's 80 CRI, which is a good CRI. And it's not mandated 90 and 2,500. As a matter of fact,
We're not asking for 90 and 2,500. Let's just be clear about.
no, that was the,
No, we understand that. That is something that we need to give relief, right? And so now we're negotiating what that relief is.
well,
And that's fine. And because you're right, it needs to be something other than that, because these things aren't available anymore. So if it's 2,700 and 3,000 at a CRA of 80, 85, 82, I'm not going to give you a hard time about the 3,000. If the light fixture is acceptable to everybody, if that's the style you want, as long as you get a good CRI, that's how I feel about it.
We
I
also
agree.
need details regarding the height of the poles.
well,
And the lumens, how bright is this light going to be?
well, it's a 75 watt, but, and we did that, we bumped it up from 50 watts to 75 to get a little more coverage in the back of the parking lot. And for that bulb, let me just do one other thing.
Well, we normally see a lighting plan, so make sure that we don't have anything
Well,
on
he
site.
submitted a lighting
Yeah.
plan.
Somewhat,
The issue
yeah,
is we
yeah.
don't have the detail as to the height of the poles.
Well, here it is, right here on the drawing, it's 12 feet high.
Okay.
Right, and there's the
fine.
light, all right. And it's a direct burial pole, it's round, and it's not steel and it's not wood, but it's a composite. And that's been on the drawing since day 2.
So this Bishop's Crook,
Yeah.
how does, Sabrina, how does the Bishop's Crook fit in with, because first time I'm really looking at this. Sorry, Chuck, I should have noticed it earlier. How does that fit in with the Station Place lighting fixtures? Does anybody know? Is it-
Station Place lighting fixtures are, I'll show you, we got the picture.
Yeah, I think that they're similar. I think the height, you have to verify the height, Chuck.
I told you, it's 12 feet.
Is it 12 feet?
I can't see the lights there.
Let's see if I can get
You
one.
wrote that down on that, on
There
the
it is,
drawing,
right
right?
here. It's a little, it's one of those
Clear lanterns.
typical, it's one of those typical, they're changing all the light bulbs in there now with, they call them corn cobs.
So what's wrong with that, fixture? Why don't you like it for your project?
Well, because there's a thing called different property, different owner, different taste, different building. We have that light fixture everywhere in town. This is a guy's private parking lot in the back.
Okay,
And to me,
that's fine, to the back, that's fine.
What about in the front?
there's nothing in the front. The light fixture on the sidewalk lights the front.
Takes care of the front.
Okay.
Okay, good.
I don't know
Good.
why we have to make everything kind of the same. Having it not perfect sometimes is good design.
Let's not get started on that.
if you wanna get
You
in.
guys miss all the winks he gives us too. I mean, there's more going on up here than you guys see. Home viewers don't get this, so this is quite the show.
And so I think I'm finished. And what Michael Campbell was gonna talk about, everything underground, I suppose, that Bob needs.
Yep.
So Chuck, lest anybody out there in TV land and here in this room, or you, think that I don't have complete respect for you as an architect. I do. I'm familiar with your work in town, and you've really made a great contribution. We just happen to disagree on a couple of things here.
Thank you.
I think it's a very tough design solution.
Okay, I'm gonna exit this. I'm gonna exit it.
Do you have enough to take back to
Yeah.
ARB?
Yes,
Okay, well, especially with Sabrina's memo and the guidelines, great.
definitely.
Okay.
Thank you so
Stay
much for
longer.
coming out.
Well, we can go out and take a seat.
We got marijuana to talk about.
I'll
grab a front row.
I can just pull it right out, I can take it right out, right? I don't have to
You
eject
should
it.
eject it on the bottom, Chuck, it's better if you eject them.
Too late.
Thanks, Chuck.
Are you gonna ask if there's public hearings? Or Michael's getting it?
Michael, there you go.
Well, we're just opening the public hearing now, I guess, right?
Opening it?
Yeah, because that was the work session, right? So now we're moving now to our next item on the agenda. This is the public hearing for the Monaco Realty LLC, application for a site development plan amendment, tree removal permit, stormwater pollution prevention plan approval, 13 Station Plaza. And is there a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning, please, don't do that to us.
No, we can make this work. It's totally love it. I'm gonna use somebody else's computer. Oh my God.
Chuck, we'll do shade after this.
Say again?
We'll do shade after this.
Yeah.
We can just stay like this too.
That's the ejection seat.
That's for, it's quick escape. I mean, just sort of roll to the right and you're down low.
Okay.
You can keep yours.
Good evening. As you know, our property is located on Station Place. It contains about 0.51 acres.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Reconfiguring our seating. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. We're located on Station Place, and our property contains 0.51 acres. Besides that, there isn't much different going on now. We have managed to get Bob's okay on the drainage, but there's some issues, and I can go over each one of them with you. I've gone over the plan. Everything that you have in your memo is something that can be done.
I hope so.
That's why I attacked all the drawings to see and make sure and find out what was missing that I thought was there.
So, Michael, since we saw you last, what are the minor or major changes that you've made in the plan so that we can be caught up on that and then we can talk to Bob about any issues?
I don't think we made any major changes. I think what we did is we reduced the size of the patio that was outside because we had a certain number that we had to hit in order to fit in all the septic. So, it's sort of a shoehorn. You got to see how much room you have and where you have to have the catch basins because they have to be 50 feet away. So I had to move those and adjust those, and this is the latest plan, and it meets everything else. And everything that has been provided in the memos, including Sabrina's memo, which talks about the chart, can be done without any problem at all. And it will be done, or it can be put right into a resolution and have us do it there, either way. I'd rather throw it in a resolution and have that prepared, and then say, hey, look, we did it already. It would make my day. Besides that, nothing's really changed. Everything's the same as it was last time. Same with the planting, which I didn't do. That was Chuck did, and Chuck is working with the environmental coordinator to make sure
Right.
that meets everything that has to be done. We have a job now to just move the parking around a little bit.
Yep.
As you have already talked about. I don't know if there's anything additional that has really changed that would make a difference at this point to you. Some of the stuff underground, like some of the tanks, have increased in size. The pre-treatment tanks are now 500 gallons each because they have to be, because of the flow rate that we have through the soil. This is a very, very sandy soil. We have a very fast rate for the percolation for the septic, and
10
for
feet a
the
minute.
other area, we have a fast rate.
No, it is, the profile is good.
Bob, you want to run through your comments?
run through them real
By the way,
quickly.
Ed, just as an overview, are any of the conditions showstoppers, or any of these are things that could be conditioned in a resolution?
I was just gonna say that.
Oh, well,
Yeah, I mean, in general, the stormwater report is satisfactory. The soils out there are fantastic. I'm not concerned with that. These are more drafting and technical items that I think should be no issue to put on.
Right.
I know you like to always put these in the resolutions, but I think, in my opinion, Michael, 1 through 13 should be done
It can be.
quickly. All drafting,
Yeah.
not a big deal, just notes, clarification, the profile, just clarification on the sight lines. There's some typos on the pre-treatment tanks on the gallonage.
Yeah.
Test pulse indicates on there that the driver's height, 3.5 should be shown on both.
I saw that, yeah.
Not one.
I went through it all, I
Yeah, it's
just,
3.5, not
Yeah.
3.5425.
I know.
But I think, in my opinion, those should all be done and rarely done.
okay.
I can see the other items are usually items that are done and put in its resolution of conditions prior to the signing, i.e., 15, stormwater management facilities have to be reviewed by council, land banking council again, 17 and 18 are usually done prior to the
Issue.
plat signing as well. 18 would actually be before the BP, but I
Right.
see no reason, Michael, why, in my mind, just to the planning board's information, they can't do 1 through 13.
Good,
We can do it. I was just trying to
yeah,
get it done.
okay.
That's what I'd recommend.
Right, good. I think it's good. Appreciate it.
And that's it?
Okay. Any comments from the public on this application? Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
Hi, Paula Beldotti. I'm the landlord for Millwood Lumber. I ran into Sabrina the other day, and I was mentioning the Moonbeam Cafe in Briarcliff, so I brought some photos. It was a house that was converted into a coffee shop, and I think it's very well done. So I just wanted to hand in some
You say it's
pictures.
Moonbeam?
The Moonbeam Cafe
Oh, Bean.
on Pleasantville Road.
I thought it was something from
Right across the
California.
street from the two banks?
Yes, Wells Fargo, yes. I'm also submitting a letter to the planning board.
Flip it.
So my main concern is, right now, I have 13 spaces on 14 Station Road, and
Across the street.
yes, and we're always monitoring the parking lot to be respectful of the rules of the 14 spaces, but unfortunately, we do get people from the Millwood Nursery and from the townhomes parking in our lot. We're always leaving notes and saying, you can't park here, we have to tow. It's gonna be an expense on my part to be constantly towing cars, and I don't wanna tow cars. So we're gonna have to have proper signage. I think it's gonna be natural instinct for people to make a right turn into my parking lot and walk across the street because it's more convenient. And when the new Millwood Firehouse was being built, there was a traffic study conducted. 18,000 cars pass by every day. And there's no crosswalk. It's gonna be very dangerous, and my tenant does not have the manpower to be monitoring this parking lot. I don't want them to put up orange cones and an ugly chain, in the morning and at night to prevent people from parking in the parking lot.
Is that
What
parking lot
signage
for
does it have
customers
now?
or for the employees?
For both,
For both? Okay.
yes.
Paulette had paid a visit to my office yesterday and was talking about the concern of having a restaurant and, you know, without the ability for people to pull in for 15 minutes if it's open for coffee or people are running by to pick up something quick, that they're not gonna pull around back and park. Or park in the parking lot, that they're gonna try and stop in front. If there's no parking there, you know, then there's issues. They'll park in her lot, cause it's probably quicker to run across the street to hop in and hop out. And so she was just airing a concern of the traffic and trying to make this fit within the context of the existing conditions, which is why, you know, in addition to the Millwood guidelines, urging the discussion of can you put 15-minute parking in front of that building, particularly if it's gonna be a restaurant for pickup and whatnot.
I think it's a very legitimate concern, especially since there's already a history of a problem there. So is there anything about the curb cut location into your parking lot that could be moved in order to sort of discourage
Well,
people from doing
I did give permission to put the Welcome to Millwood sign.
You
So
guys
we wouldn't want-
reviewed her site plan and gave her requirements as to how many cars can park in her parking lot, where her curb cuts were.
Yes, okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
But
and so.
I'm not sure, I don't remember whether the location of the curb cut responded to this particular problem. or not.
Yeah, I don't believe it did, this problem didn't exist.
I have a question for the applicants, experts. My understanding from what I heard was that this is really going to be lunch and dinner, but not breakfast.
No, I didn't say that. It's a restaurant. We're not sure what kind of
Oh,
restaurant.
you said a restaurant, and then you said lunch and
Well,
dinner.
we were talking about the cycling of uses in the building. If it was open for breakfast, there wouldn't be a lot of traffic in the retail because that doesn't start until 8 or 9. So we
10.
haven't looked at the actual cycling of uses.
Well, I'm with Tom here. This is an interesting thing. Now, a question for you, Paulette. Right now, you have signage that says, "Do not park, cars will be towed." I'm sure of that.
I have that along the bike path on the building,
On the building.
yes.
Okay, so,
I don't have any signs along Station Road.
all right, well, that might be a requirement of this project.
Well, I think that, unless I'm mistaken, I thought I heard you say that you didn't necessarily think that that was a good idea because that would be more clutter and unsightly for the sake of the road, and I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've put in the shrubbery to
Right.
make it more attractive and, you know, the Welcome to Millwood sign, so,
And I'm not sure that putting a sign there that says you can't park here is gonna keep somebody from
Welcome to
pulling
Millwood.
over for 15 minutes running into a
Welcoming.
vehicle.
right.
Welcome, can't park here.
Yeah.
Well, that's, that too.
I don't know, that's too much to put on the sign. Probably.
Find your car at.
It's a fair question. So does this cause us to look again at the land bank spaces?
I don't know.
Maybe they ought to be activated, some of them ought to be activated now, I don't know.
Especially since we don't really know necessarily what kind of restaurant it is and what the hours might be. I'm not totally convinced then that we have that much of a complementary situation with parking.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we need to know more.
Well, even if it was complimentary for the first tenant, restaurant tenant, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't change with another tenant.
Correct.
Restaurants have a 95% failure rate.
Yes, they do.
One of the good things about activating some of those land bank spaces is that they are visible as you're coming up to the property. So if you're concerned that people may not realize that there's parking behind the building, if we have some of those spaces activated at the side of the building and visible from the road, it will send people the message that there's parking on site.
Looks like an easy in, easy out.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
good point.
After the lumberyard closes at night, do they have a chain that they put across that, or it's
No.
open?
No, it's open.
And the lumberyard closes at 6?
4 in the summer,
I mean, my concern is at nighttime, when the lumberyard isn't open and that lot is completely available, people are really gonna park there.
Well, actually, the tenants across the street in the townhouses are bringing over chairs and having wine and a little party. So,
And they don't
and we're leaving all the
invite you
chairs
guys?
out.
Put that on the sign too, no wine.
When the
Wow, really?
marijuana law goes into effect.
I know, forget it. Oh, my God.
So, getting back to actually the land bank spaces, maybe we can say the same number of spaces would be land bank, they'd just be repositioned and activate spaces nearer to the street would be one way to approach this problem.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want them to overbuild the parking, but I think that this is a concern that we need to
Yeah.
be considered.
So land bank in the back
Yeah.
and turn on the ones towards the front?
Correct.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
There was some mention also about the crosswalk. Again, this is really a problem if people are parking on the other side and we don't have a crosswalk there. Can we petition
There's a
DOT
crosswalk at the intersection.
Yeah.
at the
But
intersection?
I don't think you want a
think she wants a
crosswalk in the middle of the
crosswalk. She
road.
doesn't
No,
want
I'm
to invite
just-
people
Crossing
to the
there.
parking
That's
lot.
I understand
Don't you have a
that.
condition?
Yeah, but if you put a
There is one
crosswalk there, you're
You're inviting people.
inviting them to park at her lot and cross across the street.
Crosswalk.
Right,
That was
I
put in
think
years ago.
it may be really looking more closely at, could you get a 15-minute spot right in front of the building that's not in relation to the driveway, you know, where people can just pull over, run in, grab whatever they want and go.
Yeah, 2 spots
Yeah,
or
but could you
something.
put
Yeah.
spots, could you put signage like that along a state road? Aren't they improving it?
So Sabrina, you mean like right there, right inside, because we can't park on the street, it sounds like, right?
Could we get
Maybe right there?
a bigger site plan up so we could actually look at the spaces better?
I don't know.
The state would have to approve
They'd
it,
have
but
to
who?
Can you blow this up?
Right.
Blow this up?
Don't say that, because you never know, if you go with the Millwood design guidelines, the intent of the comprehensive plan, everything that we've talked about Millwood becoming a walkable, livable place. The state gives the state kind of the rationale, we've never had that rationale before. To have them make concessions like this, particularly if there's enough room.
So, and I know, I don't disagree with Bob's concern about being too close to the street here, but maybe we can activate some of these spaces here and land bank some back here.
Yeah.
These are the ones that would be most visible, that would be the invitation, and how many do you need for the quick in and out for coffee or whatever, 3 or 4?
Could also turn those parking spaces, fill them anyway, and make them, parallel with the property line on the north side. Maybe have 2 parallel ones there. Yeah. No, on the other side where the
That takes
plants
up
are.
too much room.
Yeah,
It's 22 feet each, I don't know.
okay. Well, you got nothing now, so you have bushes, so it might work.
22 feet, what's 22 feet?
Per spot?
Parallel park.
Oh, parallel.
And, you know, I need to say something too about this state. And so years ago, there was never direction in the town's comprehensive plan about Millwood, about making Millwood a walkable, livable place. In the 90s, this was not looked at as a place where people would walk and would kind of enjoy the streetscape, the sidewalks. Today, there's a lot of push for that, for pedestrian walkable communities. The parking on the street, in this area, I would want information as to whether or not it could work, given the travel ways, because I think that given the updated comprehensive plan, the tenants within the design guidelines, there's a lot of town information in support of a couple spaces on the street here. If the geometry works, and I say that if the geometry works, so I don't want, Chuck, I don't want you to take that lightly, I think that we should really look at it.
So, this is not the only place where this is 133, right?
Correct.
And it's a state road, so it's 120, so, there are lots of them that go right through the middle of our hamlets.
Correct.
And do we impose these sight lines in the middle of our hamlets for coming out of a driveway of a parking lot? Maybe the state does.
Depends on how much traffic's on the road. State's making us follow it by the book right now, coming out
We
on
had
Center
to.
Street.
Coming out on where?
On
It's with the
Center
sight
Street.
lines on Center Street. Yeah. It
And
depends
up
on the
at
volume
the-
of the road.
The volume
Only
or the
takes
speed?
One
or-
accident.
Volume and the speed,
In history?
yes. Volume, speed, history,
So they're,
room, geometry.
And if you approve a sight line and it's inadequate, an accident and a fatality.
Yeah.
Have fun explaining that to the judge.
Yeah, no,
No,
that-
that's
that's
fair,
not the
that's fair.
intention, but we need to look at it.
Right, but, so there are accident warrants that guide this as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Sightlines are very critical. I take them very serious. I don't allow any leeway on sightlines at all, anyway in the town. I've turned down several driveways because of it, because
Yeah.
it just takes one accident, and me as a PE.
And what I'm asking is that it be looked at, whether it's 1, 3,
Yeah.
2, if there's a possibility here.
So Chuck
With
should
full
work with.
respect
should
for
work with
Bob's.
Bob on this, and.
Well, it's
Yeah.
gonna be the state in this case.
Absolutely,
know
but
what
you can
those-
help vet at
you know what
least,
those
at least
rules are.
initially. But we need information from the applicant to help us in our review,
But then
to
we just-
determine whether it's worth
But I
pursuing.
got it, but in Millwood, in Millwood, when we were doing the firehouse, did we have this sightline issue? When we were reviewing
Yes,
those
we
two
did,
applicants?
given where,
did.
yes, because of where that, yes, with the,
Oh, and they weren't parking out front.
correct, they were on the side, and we
That's
had the
right.
sight line given
We
the
had to
light.
move the landscaping. and-
We moved the landscaping out of
Sure,
there so they
because
could
of
see
that.
better,
Same
right,
reason,
okay.
because it's gonna block, the car's gonna block the visibility. You should only go up 3.5 feet.
So is there no parking in front of the townhomes, all the way going towards the?
Correct.
That's right.
Towards the supermarket?
Nope.
There's no parking there, okay.
Nope.
And keep in mind, this is a new curb cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Those existing curb cuts are different. They've been there many, many years. This
While we're
is a
talking
new
about curb cuts, across the street where the old Putt railroad station was, I can remember there's a curb cut to go into it already. And that's like almost inviting somebody to turn in. So we should look at where the curb cuts are on the east side of the road. Maybe eliminate a curb cut, makes it harder to get in, or.
So I think those are all good observations, so I think we understand where we maybe want to go with this, and
Yeah.
you guys get together and come up with something.
Is your curb cut right there? Kind of across the street from where this
Yes.
is? Okay. And then it goes that way, right?
Yes.
That's the old Putt curb cut? Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, any other comments from the public on this application? Comments from board members? So I don't think we're set yet to set you up yet for a resolution, but if there's additional information, we can continue the public hearing and get hopefully some feedback from ARB on this as well and see what they come up with. And when we have that information, we can schedule for continued public. Okay? All right. Did you have something, Jennifer?
Yeah, for public hearing, we have to continue it to a date certain.
Oh,
So we have to find out from the applicant when they can submit.
okay.
And
And one of those dates.
I
that
didn't
might-
hear you.
we
have to
have
have
to,
it-
for the purposes of public hearing, for notice purposes, we have to continue it to a specific date.
Oh.
We can't just say, come back when you submit, so we need to know
How
roughly
about
which
May
agenda you may
14th?
be.
May
June,
20
we're in June.
June?
I think June. He needs enough time to get this stuff done.
Okay. And the submission is in May anyway, right?
Well-
May 13th to the June 4th.
The one before that, if you go May,
We don't have that much work
Which
to
one
do.
in June?
We don't have that much work to do.
Right.
Right. I
Michael
don't think-
says this is, an hour or two on the drafting
So
board.
when can you have your work done?
hang on, let us look at what we have.
Yep.
Well,
This is the problem with scheduling too.
Well, let's see, we'll have a race, maybe, if you wanna try for May 7th. I
When-
can't make, well, if we do this, we have to do him because he's a public hearing.
Right.
So what's the deadline for May 7th?
April 15th.
April 15th.
I'll change all those parking spaces around and
Yeah. And Michael's got to do the conditions for
We-
Bob.
I
And-
I can meet with the BAR
What's the one for May, the next meeting in
the
May?
last Wednesday
April 29th.
of the month.
I would rather go for May 21st.
Next architectural review board,
May 17th?
yeah, we've got one tomorrow, but.
Yeah, I would
I
do
mean,
May
provide
21st,
drawings.
go for the May 21st.
Okay, so you're going to meet on May 17th, ARB?
Yeah, so that would be the next one that he could attend.
Mason.
May.
So we meet,
We meet May 21st.
all right, so the
And
date then is May
we
21.
need to be in by,
April 29th.
April 29th. Well, let's do May 21st, and
Right.
I will make sure that there's communication with the Architectural Review Board
Right.
regarding the design guidelines. Chuck can prepare to go back to them on the 17th of
Right.
May, and then we can try and get a little
Great.
bit further for this board.
And I think it would be very helpful if you can coordinate the information coming from BAR as well. So if there are
Absolutely.
any changes that are coming from BAR, it would be great
It's
to have those.
only a couple days, but
for our
I will
May-
do my
exactly.
best.
Exactly.
I
Okay,
will do my best, but I would like to urge the applicant to try and address all of the concerns that were discussed
Yes.
tonight, so that you guys have some actual information to react to.
yep.
Is there gonna be a swap for the areas for the parking, or a new parking, because that needs more stormwater?
No,
just
swap.
swap.
Swap, okay.
Yeah, land bank in the back.
Yep.
We're getting, we're putting more. The intention is to put more cars closer to the road.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Bring your
would,
parking forward.
I would leave this way, but also give us the alternative so we can look at both. It's not like this is what it's gonna be, just give us the alternative so we have that information. And whatever you can show us in concert with Bob,
And you could
if
see the
anything, for
cars,
parking in front.
you could see the cars we're talking about that are closer to the road, right?
Pardon?
Yes, yes.
There's 4 spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
And on the other side too.
Yeah,
And there's 4 spaces there.
right. And then design something, I mean, Dick, before he left, said, I like the 4 spaces up front, but then again, you may want to put a break with some shrubs and bushes, after that to, again, cover the back parking lot. Be creative on it.
Really interesting idea. I like that.
Yeah,
It's sort of,
some break. It's
Yeah,
not just a
this-
solid
this is where you
parking.
park short term, right?
Right. So if you give us those alternatives, it'll be great.
Just, I don't feel like eating out on the patio with a bumper next to my table, so I might eliminate one of those spaces on that side and leave it a buffer.
Here?
This one.
That one, yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah, okay.
Be creative, plan it, do it, that's fine. Good. Delco, we'll let you go in a second. We'll take the resolution for Che, the application for a site development plan approval for a change of use, 45 South Greeley Avenue.
Here's your.
Okay, it was in our packet. Does anyone have any changes or thoughts on the resolution as drafted?
I just thought there might have been a typo in line 35 on page 1, which would result in the approximately square foot building, square foot, 3-story building accommodating retail on the first floor and a total for residential studio apartments.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm. Anything else, anyone?
Oh, and I guess you're not all present.
Yeah, Dick is not here. We'll have to strike Dick. And Steve's not here either. Okay. Any other changes? If not with those changes, is there a motion to approve the resolution for the Che apartment?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, we go now next to our informal hearing for a new application. This is Rakipi, okay. Application for a site development plan approval for a change of use, 229 King Street. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. Clever, huh?
Did Michael, he was doing the extension? He's not staying for that, is he?
He said it was no big deal, so he didn't have to be here.
Okay,
Okay.
all good.
Good talk.
Can't make it up. All good.
Good evening. My name is Martin Diano. I'm working with Dennis Noskin Architects out of Terrytown, and I'm here to represent Anna Ripka on her change of use. The building is on the corner of King Street and Maple Avenue. It's been in operation for many, many years. They have a basement floor, which is in the back. The property is low in the back, and off that back property is the salon, which is in question now. Up on the first floor, there's a medical offices, I should say, and on the second and third floors, there's a residential unit. We're here tonight to get approval, but I understand that we may have to go before the zoning board regarding the additional parking space.
Right, right.
So, if you need, I can show you a little bit what's going on. This one's not working.
After our, Sabrina, that's after we grant the waiver of 3.
Yes.
If we so,
yes.
yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, what you're seeing here is the first floor where the doctor's office is.
Right.
And this is the basement floor where the salon is.
I just want to be executive.
Now also, the second and third floor is accessed from the first floor and the corridor going upstairs. So that's really all with that.
Sir, can you use the microphone?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
Sure,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
You can take it off there so you don't.
Yeah, it moves around.
This is the basement floor on the right and the first floor on the left. The first floor on the left is where we have offices, medical offices, and also the entrance to the second floor, which has a two-story residence only. The basement is on the right, and off there, right coming out of here, is where the parking lot is, directly outside of the, should say, the salon. What you have here is strictly showing you the apartment. Again, the first floor where the entrance is, the second floor, and then the third floor. But they do have a fire escape there for access out. On the, let's see, can I get this one more? Oh, no, my mistake. We have lighting, site lighting right now presently is on the building located here. And we also have site lighting here, which lights up the access into the apartments. And we have lighting on a tree right now that accesses and lightens the path from the doctor's office down to the parking area. We have a garbage area here. We have, and I showed 10 spots for the required, but obviously after going through and reading through their Sabrina's calculations, we're at the point where we would need a reduction, or have to go for a variance.
Yeah.
So this is chiefly bringing this property into compliance?
Yeah,
right?
Pre-existing
Right.
uses, the new aspect is actually moving a use into the basement area. All of the information, the shared, the non-competing uses, the apartment, everything, the parking requirement, the reduction that you can allow seems appropriate. The variance should not be an issue. In total, after you reduce for non-competing uses, they will need a variance for 2 of the parking spaces. Most of the work that needs to be done has been building-oriented, fire and safety-oriented. There are 2 elements that I had provided to you per the building inspector, who told me that, the applicant is working to work with him to get all of this installed. And then these 2 bullets in my second memo regarding fire and safety on March 29th.
Yep.
Can be incorporated as part of your resolution of
That
approval.
was the chimney memo.
What?
Cleaning out the chimney?
In the Knox box.
Yeah, the
Knox
Knox
box
box,
and
right?
then
There was
the
that memo,
chimney.
okay.
And the applicant has been very cooperative, working with the building inspector. She really just wants to make sure that everything is on the up and up of the site. She purchased the site, these things were wrong when she purchased
Right.
the site, so she's correcting all of the ills that exist.
And do we have any issues at all with stormwater on the site?
No, she's not doing any
Changes.
building
I
or
have no
anything.
comment on that, nothing, no
Yeah.
addition, no new impervious stuff.
Okay, fine. Okay. Superintendent, anything else you want to raise in your, that you?
No, I
didn't
think
touch on
everything
yet?
else was consistent. You know, they provided the additional details, description of the site lighting should be provided on the site plan. The signage should be
Right.
provided, the details regarding the signage. There's a couple of changes to the zoning conformance table,
Mhm.
particularly since you do have variances for setbacks. Just
Correct.
reference those ZBA variances for forward thinking. And then, you know, it is a type 2 action in
Right.
accordance with secra, and then other than the parking, there's really no other board review necessary.
Right.
But I have no objection to you moving forward and setting a public hearing on the project.
Right. Any questions, anyone? Concerns, questions? Okay, if not, is there a resolution to direct staff to drop a resolution and once we schedule a public hearing?
And are you also going to refer to the zoning board?
Or I
for
guess we
them
can
to-
refer a positive note to the zoning board in support of the application. We can.
The alternative would be to handle the application and have a condition be that they need to get the variance. But I think typically this board refers, and then the applicant will come back
Okay.
for the final
Would
review.
that be after the zoning or before the zoning, we can go back?
I
Zoning
think-
first and then come back.
Okay.
But I also
Typically
think
how
if
it's
you want to
worded.
make a positive recommendation, you can condition your approval if the zoning board hasn't heard it by the time they come back.
Right, I wouldn't hate to
Yeah.
hold
To
you up.
be conditioned, your resolution be conditioned on successful receipt
Yeah.
of the variance. Again, and there's been, this has been a very long time, the applicant has been working with the building department, trying to get the application correct. I would hate to delay if we can
That
avoid
would be
it.
fine.
Fair enough. Are you, I don't suppose you're on the ZBA agenda yet?
No, not yet. We
No.
just got that, I thought I had to wait for you to,
Okay. So when can we do this? Can we do the May 21st, or you want to do the May 7th?
How quickly can you adjust a couple things on the plans and?
it's very, very little
Do we have
I
enough
have
time to
do.
notice a public hearing for the 7th, Janice?
Yeah,
Okay. What's the deadline for May 7th submission?
April 15th.
We can do that?
Do our best to make sure we get it done.
Okay, so we can schedule it then for May 7th. And is there a motion then to direct staff to drop a resolution?
Motion?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to do a positive recommendation in a memo to be reviewed by the
Yeah.
chair, rather than the entire board?
If that's okay with board members.
Okay with me?
Okay, so we'll send you something.
Okay, good. Very good.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. You're interesting for us to know.
Oh,
Is
okay.
there a vote on the positive recommendation?
I don't know if we took a vote, we just,
Oh.
like acclamation,
Yeah.
edict,
Consensus?
consensus. Did you want a motion?
We might as- Yes, I think we should.
Okay, is there a motion then to?
Motion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All in favor?
Have a good
Aye.
night.
Thank you. I actually think I'm getting worse at this. Okay. We have, we're here for,
Now we
Yeah,
have,
so if we're moving on to
Extension.
the local laws, Drew Gamos from my office is here.
Okay.
She's the drafter of these local laws.
do we want to do the request for the extension, just be done with it?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I thought maybe you were here just because you wanted to listen. I was like,
No,
wow.
Drew's here to object to the
Wow,
extension.
the extension.
Okay, we have an extension here, request on, what is this? Ruben Yao. Any problems, issues? Jennifer, you're okay with it? No problems? Okay. Is there a motion then to grant the extension that's been requested?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. So now we move to our first item, that's a referral from the town board. And this is the local law to amend Chapter 60, Sections 210 and 410 regarding retail marijuana sales.
So as I mentioned, Drew Gamos from my office is here. She is the principal drafter of this local law and the other local law that we have on our agenda tonight. So she had a discussion with the town board at their last meeting about these two laws, and we figured it would be a good idea for her to come in and present the local laws to this board as well.
Hi everyone,
Go ahead.
nice to see you again or meet you for the first time. We're starting with the marijuana local law. This came about because the governor had put in his budget a proposed legalization of recreational marijuana. That has since gone away. That will not be in this year's budget. But the town board at the time wanted to be proactive and do something. So what they decided to do was adopt a provision in the zoning law that would regulate marijuana retail facilities in the same manner that vape retail facilities are regulated. So they're not prohibited, but they're limited in where they may be located.
So, the town board views marijuana in the same category as the vape products and lumps them together and sees them the same and therefore imposes the same restrictions on them?
You know, I can't speak for the town board. I'm sure they see them differently. They are two different.
But the legislation
But the
treats them the
legislation is
same.
the same, yeah. So just for the ease of amending the code and moving quickly at the time when we thought, this could happen very soon, we thought, this is an existing provision. These restrictions would be reasonably applied to marijuana retail facilities as well. So instead of duplicating the vape shop limitations, they simply added marijuana retail facilities to that section.
Right.
And does the vape shops kind of follow the alcohol shops? Because I know the distances to schools and churches and parks, that alcohol has the same thing, doesn't it? Certain distances?
I'm not familiar with the alcohol shops.
Currently in
Liquor stores.
the
Like a
Newcastle.
liquor store and a
Yeah.
bar.
I don't know about the Newcastle code,
That's a joke.
but there is that is a concept generally in zoning for
So
regulating.
my question is
alcohol.
marijuana vape following alcohol?
Yes, with those distance restrictions,
It's a
yes.
similar-
I don't know if they're like, if the distance restrictions are identical.
But the
Right.
categories are the same.
But
Right, the
the same
categories are
idea.
similar, okay.
Yes, and the categories are similar.
If the state were to legalize the use and sale of recreational marijuana, is it legal for municipalities in the state to outlaw the sale of it in their own municipality?
So it depends on how the state legislation is adopted. So under the governor's bill, only cities and counties were allowed to adopt regulations towards marijuana retail facilities. However, there's also a proposed bill in the Senate which does not restrict municipalities and their ability to adopt local laws in this area. So it really depends on what final legislation is approved.
So I think a couple of municipalities locally have adopted bans on marijuana sales, which brings up the question of whether they would withstand a challenge. And also, though, brings up the question of if surrounding municipalities are outlawing the sale of recreational marijuana, do those municipalities that have not outlawed it become a magnet for those retail sales?
Right.
Is it possible to have two streams of law? One that says if the state allows municipalities to opt out, then this presuming that this municipality does want to opt out, is it possible to have two streams of laws? One that says if a town can't opt out, then we'll have these restrictions in place, but if a town is able to opt out, then we would have a ban in effect?
So, first, to answer your question, Newcastle's not opting out. We're not prohibiting marijuana retail facilities. We're just restricting where they can
I
go.
think she's going somewhere
I'm-
else.
Yeah, so I just want to point out that,
I do understand
because you're
that.
right, the municipalities, several municipalities in New York and some in Westchester have banned it completely,
Yes.
banned these retail facilities. So Newcastle is unique. As far as having
I'm sorry.
two,
Newcastle is unique in that it's the only one who is,
no,
what
so.
is Newcastle unique?
Unique because we're unique because we are not banning it. We are limiting where these facilities can open.
But
Other municipalities
Have
have
banned
also,
Like in
but
Long
other
Island.
municipalities
No,
have
like in
also not
Pleasantville
banned
and
it.
in Mount
Pleasant-
Pleasant.
Yes,
Have banned
Our,
it.
this,
So
this
we're
law
not
is,
unique. This
is
is-
very similar to Pleasantville. So
yes, I'm
it's-
sorry.
Yeah.
I'd say the majority are doing nothing, some are banning it, and then there are a few who are going along the same path as Newcastle.
Trying
So
to
we're
fold
in
it
the
into-
minority.
legislation for zoning.
Yes.
To control it.
Yes, to control it. So there's kind of three camps at this point.
Well, I think, and based on the distances that were selected, it's more than just a control limitation. I think it was kind of a backward way of trying to eliminate it, except for one change, I think, and that is the 2,000 feet from a school. I'm not quite sure that Felix is doing this yet, but he might. I think Greeley might be 2,000 feet away from Chappaqua Crossing, at least some of the stores in Chappaqua Crossing. So that would be, I mean, obviously residential areas are all, you can't have retail sales. So that would be something I think that as quickly as we're trying to patch this together, that might be something that should be looked at.
So-
I think we have restrictions in terms of types of stores at Chappaqua Crossing, but that's not to say that that won't change,
So has anybody taken a map of town and done the radii for all of these restrictions to discover whether actually all of the zones in which these would be allowed to be are within those radii, and the only land left over is residential land, therefore nothing can happen there? Has anybody done that map?
Yes, we did. So when we did the vape legislation, we did an overlay. So there are several, so there's a map out there that's several, like, we'll call them.
Couple Venn diagrams?
Yeah, like Venn diagrams.
We did not do it for Chappaqua Crossing, we did it for downtown. We did it
What
for the
about
BR
Millwood?
What about
zones
Millwood?
in
What
Chappaqua
about
and Millwood. We did it within the BR zoning district,
So you did for the two hamlets.
correct, but we did not do it at Chappaqua Crossing.
It should be
Millwood,
done for Chappaqua
church and-
Crossing.
But you did one around every school, or did you just deal with
We did the zoning, it was only, you cannot put them in residential zones.
got it, okay.
So we did it in relation to zoning.
To the-
We can do it, I don't know if it would be.
But you didn't do the distance on the Venn diagrams in terms of the 500 and the 2,000 feet that are in the vape law right now?
Well, we haven't gone so far with the marijuana law yet.
Well, this is the same, it's already here in the vape law.
Yes,
The
the
same
same, so
distance.
what we did for the vape
If
law.
it's the same
it's
zones,
the
then it's
exact
the same zones.
Yeah.
Exact same
You just said
distance.
it's the same zone.
It's, we're just inserting a couple words in each
Yeah.
one of these.
Yeah, that's it, and adding a couple definitions, and these definitions come from the state law. They were also pulled, so there's also marijuana infused products. That was from the proposed bills. Now, those aren't going anywhere at this time, but, I didn't make those definitions up. Those are
Right.
kind of what the state is looking for. And this is already in the, marijuana is already addressed in the public health law.
Are
New
these
York State
definitions
public health law.
consistent in both the proposed Assembly as well as the Senate bills? So do we at least have consistency there from the state?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that's at this time.
Right, of course.
I can't tell you what's gonna happen in the future, it's changing very quickly. So, right now, we're just trying to stay on top of what's happening at the state level and what can we do for Newcastle to address the town's concerns.
Does the legislation define schools?
No,
So a private
not this
school, a
legislation.
charter school, maybe something like this, would that also be, is it just public schools?
Yeah, no, it includes all schools.
So again, cooking schools, junior schools.
Sunday school, Saturday school.
Well, seriously, I mean, who knows? So, and again, going back to what Tom was saying before, I don't understand what the distances mean. My sense on it was, I thought we'd actually looked at the Greeley, et cetera, was by the time you put those Venn diagrams down, there are going to be very, very few spaces. And I thought perhaps that was the intention of the law, to make very few spaces.
That was.
And basically prohibit it in a backward way.
Well, we don't wanna say prohibit it,
No, I know
because
that.
legally, you can't prohibit
Right.
the use. They have a right to open their business if that's what we're going to do. But we do limit where they can go, and there
Right.
were only a few locations when we looked at Chappaqua and when we looked at Millwood in the context of the vape.
Right.
Now we haven't changed anything but to add marijuana retail stores to those categories. So technically, vape shops and marijuana retail facilities will be competing for those spots because they're restricted in the same way.
So what
My suggestion would be that there are, forgive me, just one quick thing, is that there are definitions of schools, and that should be looked at in terms of who is licensed as a school, whether it's a pre-K school, what do we call?
Daycare?
Daycare, exactly. So, I don't know how it's defined, but if we start looking at all of those in our town, and we start using the 2,000-foot, 500-foot distances that are proposed in the law that we already have for the vape shops, I think that's something that we should really do.
So the zoning code currently has a definition of private school and public school. Private school being a kindergarten, primary, or secondary school furnishing a comprehensive curriculum of academic instruction, and public school being an educational institution operated by a public school district or combined school district under the laws of the state of New York. So those would not, under our zoning definitions, it wouldn't include the daycare or preschools. But I think that's something that could be clarified by, in the law, when we say any school, are we referring to any private or public school as defined in our zoning? Or are we, or do we mean
Or
that
do
to
we
be
want
more
to broaden it
expansive?
to something else? It seems to me, actually, when you start thinking about it, some of the other schools are actually a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Perhaps you want to embrace
Well,
those.
When we looked at this for vapes, one of the concerns was, you know, do you really need to consider daycares? Because the concern was teenagers, you know, purchasing vape products and then using them. And, you know, students going to daycares might not have the same,
Well, but
you know,
they do eat brownies.
it's something
Yeah,
to
that's happened
consider.
actually in a couple of schools.
Yeah, that actually has. So this actually gets to, I think, gets to my original question, which is that, unless I'm mistaken, you're saying that the town board is doing this partially, I'm guessing this, but here's a guess, doing this to get ahead of what's coming downstream. Might as well do it now, rather than being under pressure to do it when actually these things are starting to happen. Let's just get ahead of the curve and get our zoning in place and get it done. So, and then I asked you whether they saw marijuana to be the same as vape. And you said you didn't know whether they had actually declared that, but there is a conflation here that suggests that. And so when it actually comes downstream, and when the law, if the law gets approved in Albany, and then it's time to address the question of people coming in with applications for marijuana stores, marijuana shops, it's too late then to say, well, wait a minute, marijuana is not the same. And so, because it isn't, it's a completely different sort of risk scenario, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'm asking the question, not of you, because you don't really speak for the town board on this, unless you know the answer, whether maybe there's a little bit too much haste when it comes to thinking that through. If they've thought it through, then, I'm silent on the issue. But if they haven't thought it through, and maybe this isn't the role of the planning board to ask the question anyway, but personally, I think that it's something that maybe ought to be considered.
And I think I do know that the original intention was that they wanted the same restrictions in place for vape shops to apply to marijuana retail facilities. And
That's what they did.
exactly, and that's
The
what they
question
did.
is why?
But they didn't talk about, the impacts from marijuana retail facilities would be the same as vape shops. That
Would
hasn't
it be in
been-
the same shop?
vape and marijuana products?
Yeah. Could
Yeah,
it be the
they
s-
could.
Just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, no, they could. Again, though, it might come down to how the state licensed these facilities.
Right, could
So
be only one thing is
they might
sold
only
there,
be able
right?
to have one thing. In theory, they could have both.
Well, but-
However, I don't know what the state, there's going to be very strict licensing requirements for these facilities. And one other thing, this law does not apply to medical marijuana
Right, of
facilities.
course.
Right,
And
right.
those dispensaries are legal in New York, but they are strictly regulated by the state.
Right, this is purely recreational.
Yep, and there are two, one in White Plains and there is one in Yonkers.
So,
It seems to me that the sense here then is that, we're not going to solve this thing, but the sense is, I think, is that our referral note back to the town board is, why rush into this? There's some other things that we ought to be thinking about in terms of your definition, your scope, your treatment. My feeling is the same as Tom's. I think this was something that was looked at very quickly. Get that vape law out. What do we do? Slap it on here. It's very fast, very easy without having to reinvent the wheel, and we'll have something. It may not be perfect, but at least we have something, because something was coming down, they thought perhaps, from Albany rather quickly. Now that we seem to have a little bit more time, it's not in the budget law, it seems to me that some of these issues could be looked at a little bit more carefully.
yeah, and if it hasn't been looked at as carefully as I think we're suggesting, once you put this law in place, and somebody comes into town after Albany said yes, they come into town and say, well, your zoning says I can put a marijuana store here. There's no walking that back. I mean, you essentially have to accept it, unless I'm mistaken. You're done on that issue, so I think it maybe
And you're
requires a little
free-
bit more thought.
And since you said it's not in the budget, does that mean they have to have it in next year's budget for the assembly and for them to address it? So
Well, they
this
can
year
pass
they're-
it any
Are they
time.
not, they can pass it, but if it's not in the budget, it doesn't, how,
So
what's
the
budget have to
budget
do with
was
it?
like that was
How it
going,
was
That was a
yeah, that was how it was proposed, and it was,
Ah, okay.
proposed for 2020,
So
it
it was
was,
introduced.
yeah, it was,
In the governor's budget.
As a
Probably.
sources.
Right.
yes.
Probably
But it didn't
as
make the
tax
cut.
rev-
It didn't make the
probably-
cut, it got the boot.
Probably
Gotcha.
got, introduces tax revenue.
Yeah, as a source, okay, fair enough.
So I think it's also important to remember that no matter when the town board adopts this local law, or if it adopts it prior to the state acting to pass whatever bill they're gonna pass, we're gonna need to revisit this and just make sure that whatever was passed by the town board,
It comports with it.
it comports with
And
whatever's
aren't we looking at
going to be
redoing some
passed
of
by
the
state.
zoning in downtown Chappaqua now anyway?
Correct.
So it all has to get tied into that. Yeah. So-
It's a scope
so-
item for our consultants.
So, I mean,
Right,
does
so we're
that
all
seem
gonna
like
get tied together.
a rational basis for a memo back to
I
the town
think
board?
Tom makes a very good point that they're not, that the vape and the marijuana are not equivalent products.
Different categories.
They're different categories and they have different risk factors, and maybe that has to be factored into whatever kind of legislation is adopted.
And therefore, they should not necessarily be linked together in the legislation.
They may not
Yeah.
end up being parallel
Right.
codes, they may have some differences.
In the same way that liquor stores have restrictions, but they're not the same as vape shops.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
I hear you, I agree.
Okay, that makes sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. Who's gonna draw that up? Are you gonna do that, Drew?
I can do that.
Okay,
Do you want to do the memo for your review and approval, or for the whole
no,
board?
for the board. Yeah, that should be for the board, I think. It's, a policy to it. Okay, we move now to our next item. This is the local law to amend the town code regarding small cell wireless technology, or facilities, excuse me, sorry.
So,
They're gone.
The dispensary is out.
Sorry,
it's okay.
I'm just trying to get some cough drops out of my colleagues here.
Sorry about that.
I'm sure they have them.
They don't want to
They're
share.
shareable.
Janice has them, Janice has one.
You're within 500 feet of Bob, you
Who
can't have one.
Who needs one?
Needs one.
That's good. I do. Thank you very much.
Well, if they're candy tasting, I'll take one.
We're gonna be arrested tonight.
These are the ones I used to have when I was a kid.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, cell phone towers.
Yeah.
This is serious
Yeah,
stuff.
This is
tell us
serious.
the thrust of the changes, because it was really confusing.
So, I apologize for that. We try to make it as simple as possible, but this is a complicated topic and therefore a complicated law.
I'm going to just make one observation here before you get started, is that this landed on my computer for the first time. Maybe I missed an earlier rendition of this on like Friday. And it's a 40-page draft. And there's like an 11-page change to the use regulations here. So I actually have no comments to the substance of this because there was no time to look at it seriously, but I really am looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, and I think there actually might be a benefit to listening to the background and maybe an overview of the law, and then taking your time to go through it with a
you.
little extra knowledge.
Thank you.
So I think that might be a good approach. And if anyone has looked at it and has questions, that's great too. But I'm prepared to give an overview about what we did and why we did it,
Very good.
which I think might help your review. So the wireless telecommunications services facilities. They're currently regulated in your zoning code under section 60-430-014. So that's the special use permit section. In Newcastle, there are two different kinds of facilities currently. There are the structurally mounted wireless telecommunications services facility, major. That's defined as any structurally mounted wireless telecommunications service facility that is not a minor structurally mounted wireless facility. So then, the second category is the minor category, and that's a wireless
That's one which is not a major.
Yes. This one has a little more meat to it. It's a wireless facility located within a public street or utility right-of-way in which one or more antennas are structurally mounted to an existing utility pole, roadway sign, bridge, or other type of structure not exceeding the height of such structure by more than 3 feet, together with associated equipment to be located on the ground.
So is that when we see them on the side of buildings
Rooftops
and
and-
rooftops? It's not a tower.
It's not a tower.
Okay.
So I think the minor facilities
You can count.
correlate closer to small wireless facilities, which we'll be talking about. The major facilities are more of those cell towers that we're kind of used to seeing.
But actually, don't they serve different functions altogether? Because the small cell facilities are for the 5G network, which has a different characteristic altogether than the major and minor receptors that we have now.
So that's a good question. Not necessarily. Small cell facilities can actually also serve our 4G network as well. And they can be used to improve capacity, connectivity, all sorts of different things. In fact, we see small cells popping up in Westchester, but 5G actually hasn't come to our area. So they're here to serve the 4G network. In the future, the goal is that 5G will be served by these small cell facilities.
And do we anticipate 5G in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years?
I've talked to various providers about that estimate, and they're not sure at this time. It is going to New York City, they're working on it there, and the goal is definitely to bring it to Westchester sooner rather than later, but I have not been provided with a timeline per se, so I don't know.
But when we're looking at this drastically revised law, are we looking at it with an eye towards the demands that the 5G network will place on our community?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, the demands?
Well, the demand-
Well, what, as I understand it, because I've been trying to do a little bit of reading about this, is that 5G network, which is what's coming next for cell phones and delivery of data, requires a far greater number of receptors, and they won't be on towers because they have to be closer together,
Okay,
and
right.
so we're going to be potentially looking at
So
many more.
that's what you mean by
It's more of a
demands.
web.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So a
And the
much
impacts.
wider network of
Right,
installations.
right.
And that's because 5G travels at millimeter wavelengths, so kind of like, versus 4G travels more like waves. And so the 5G waves won't go as far. They go about 1,000 feet versus 4G goes a couple miles, which is why you need these small cells, because you need more of them to reach people because they don't travel as far.
There's another
The
issue
signal doesn't
too
travel.
that I understand in doing some research on this, and that is that the 5G systems are going to require gigantically increased electrical demands to run these, which are going to mean just more demand on the system, but it might also mean more of these backup battery centers that we see. For example, on some of the 4Gs that we see in some of the buildings, you don't see necessarily a battery backup system, but perhaps with these, I don't know if it's the case, but because there's the demand for electrical power to power the 5G system is so much greater that we're probably going to see more battery backup, these platforms that we have in case something goes down. So I think that's something else that we should be cognizant of in terms of the impact, because I think Sheila's right on target with this stuff. This is really huge in terms of what we're going to see in our community in terms of, making the system work.
There's evidence of what Bob said. It's one thing for a supplier of this technology to come into a community and say, well, what you're going to have is these small boxes on telephone poles that are going to be 800 feet apart. But what he doesn't tell you is that there's this other piece of hardware, right, that may also be on the pole every 1,800 feet apart, or might be station
Or
on the
platform
ground.
on the ground.
On every pole.
Platform on the
I mean,
ground.
I think the two
And
are
stuff
linked
hanging
together.
from the
You have
poles
the,
in order to make it all work. I don't trust them to tell us that. And there's, no, because there's actually
Seriously?
evidence in towns where they've been surprised at actually what happened. And one of the problems, I think, of this technology is these boxes are not, they're not shared by,
Yeah, I've got everything.
they have their,
they're not shared by,
Should I do it now?
they're not shared by providers. That each provider like Verizon, opposed to T-Mobile or whoever is going to be, driving the signals with their product. They don't share them. So, well, maybe each box for one provider needs to be 800 feet apart. You got 4 providers, you got these things on every telephone pole, more or less.
There's also an aesthetic concern
Well,
based on what they look like.
Sure.
And if they do collate and how many are on one pole and.
but can the poles, when you drive around town, the poles look like they're sagging under the weight of what's
Oh,
up
God,
there
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
How much do these new, receptors weigh and then the associated equipment that goes with it? And then they're gonna be putting them on utility poles as well. Can it actually support the weight?
Bob, for right now, when we have a backup battery system on a cell tower, to Tom's point, does each carrier who might be co-located on there have their own backup battery system, their own platform? And
They have their own generators and
That's what I'm saying,
equipment
the backup
cabinets.
generators
I
and
would
all that.
assume they do, yeah.
I don't think I've seen that many around these cell towers, so I'm just wondering if that's the
In
case.
their
I've seen
equipment-
generators, but
On the
that's
ground.
it.
No,
Yeah, on the ground.
isn't there a landlord who has the tower, and then the guys all
Yes.
rent space? So the landlord probably has one generator.
you're right.
That does everything.
So we don't have
I've
4
seen-
generators if we have 4 collated.
You've
No,
seen
not
that.
true?
Not true.
No, they
There
all
are,
have
when
their own
you have an equipment compound, there's usually 2 spots per carrier, one for the generator and one for the backup generator and one for the equipment.
So then if you have
Okay.
4 carriers on a
Then there's
pole,
6
you've got 8
spaces
of
in
those
that
things?
fence. Yes,
Wow.
absolutely.
And
Interesting,
that's on
okay.
Hoag's Cross, and that's also on,
I don't know
128?
I don't know if it's on Hoag's Cross, it is definitely on the one on 128.
So, with regard to the technology, it has much greater capacity, right? Speed capacity by 1,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I understand. Is it also able to carry, I think you said, a 4G signal?
So it depends. So it's funny you asked that, because I asked that same question at a conference last week. Whether once you install these small cell facilities for 4G, do you have to take them down and put a new small cell that'll be 5G capable? And it depends on what they install and what signal they start to use. Potentially, there could be a little switch, and that small cell facility would be able to service 5G signals. However, that might not necessarily be able to happen, and they'd have to install a new small cell.
So I asked the question, that's interesting, I asked a question to a different outcome, which would be if these devices could carry both a 4 and a 5, would it therefore make sense for those areas where there's enough of them to cover, where there already is an existing 150-foot cell tower? Is that a redundancy that would allow the town to say, okay, we need to take down that cell tower, which is now obsolete? Because it's not unusual for utilities just to walk away from their stuff.
So cell towers will not become obsolete. You need to have service in order for 5G to work. So you have to bring service to the area first, and then 5G improves it, makes it faster, does all this other
So
stuff.
5G works off of the existing cell tower?
They work together.
Well, would you need any more big towers?
Yes, it won't eliminate them. It could reduce how many get installed, but you could still see applications for towers. They won't become.
So the 5G runs through the tower?
The 5G runs, so first the cell tower brings the service to the community, and then the 5G works with that tower to improve the.
Locally.
Yes, works locally.
So the 5G brings a wave that looks like this, And
More
turns it
like-
and then turns it like
This
this.
is five.
That's
Five is
fine.
this,
No,
and
wait,
four is
wait.
one.
No, I know that.
Yes.
The 5G,
How are you gonna put that in the
the
minutes?
tower. I told you I had brownies. The
Before.
The 4G comes out of the towers like this.
Yes.
And unless I'm mistaken, you're saying that the box on the telephone pole that's a 5G takes that signal and turns it into this?
Yes, in a very simplified, without getting more technical.
It'll probably also depend upon the carrier too,
It- it-
because they all
it
have different
depends.
technologies.
There's a lot of factors.
So the
that
tall
go
towers
into
are
it.
like a base station?
Yes.
Oh,
I don't want to use,
It's
base
kind of like
station is a
long-term
defined.
transmission lines. Con Ed's long-term transmission lines are kind of the big
talk about the
towers,
height
and
of the
then
small
localized stuff
wires?
is the little boxes.
Not yet.
Right.
So they ram it up and they ram it down. They amp it up
They're
and
small,
they amp it
but
down.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
Well,
like.
I think that helps
So
put it in
just,
perspective.
yeah, I think this information might help also.
Pictures.
Yeah, lots of pictures.
I brought
These,
some pictures too.
this sheet, these are all samples of different types of small cells. Don't worry, I have one for everybody.
Great. Thank you.
And does any of this affect the application we have in front of us now?
Oh, well,
Yeah, what is Homeland, what is that? Is that just a
That's what's
4G
in
tower?
here.
that's a 4G, and there's discussion about 5G in relation to this 4G, so
On
you're
that
being
tower.
educated regarding this now, and you can apply it to the next application.
This picture, these are regular cell towers,
Right.
just so you guys have a comparison.
But these don't go away.
Nothing goes away.
Nothing goes away.
This is just additive.
Yes.
What?
This is additive to this.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
But maybe the little
We
ones
know what
stop
this
the
looks
big
like.
ones. But maybe the little ones reduce the amount of new big ones.
Yeah, but we're gonna have so many little ones.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of little
We're gonna have
ones.
so many little ones.
But also, what I want to point out on these pictures is look at where the bulk of the visual capacity,
It's down low.
the mass of the 5G is. It's very low.
Well,
That's only
not-
if it's on an integrated pole. That's
No,
a
no,
stealth
the
pole
one where
that's
it's on the
designed
top.
to
Yeah,
to
right.
carry it. Otherwise, if it's retrofitted onto one of our telephone poles, it can be very unstreamlined looking, and I have pictures of unstreamlined ones.
Yeah, I have pictures of that
And
too.
then I have some pictures of these shrouds.
Yes,
um,
they're
that-
horrific.
Yeah.
That are, well, they're
There's also-
they're better than what the antenna looks like unshrouded.
There's
I mean,
also,
it's not a lot of good options.
Verizon did an application in the city of SeaTac. I thought they put together a nice PowerPoint that kind of goes through the comparison between what macro cells are the towers and their small cell facilities. So I thought the pictures in here were helpful. And they provide just a little background information, not very much, but this is just really for picture purposes.
No, this is good, thank you.
Yep, I got copies for everybody. Here you go.
Great visual aids.
See that. For application.
Where's CTAC?
Take a lesson from
I knew before and I totally just forgot. I think Washington or California?
Seattle,
When the
Seattle,
5G
isn't it?
network rolls out,
Tax Seattle, Tacoma.
has the FCC made a ruling about whether the overlay regulations that apply to the macro towers will apply to the small cell
That's a big full size.
networks also?
I'm sorry, can you say that? I apologize.
When 5G is rolled out, has the FCC made a ruling, maybe under the 1996 Act, Communications Act, about whether the same federal overlay regulations that apply to the macro cell towers will also apply to the 5G network?
So on September 26th, 2018, the FCC adopted its third report and order and declaratory ruling, which governs small wireless facilities and sets forth specific rules and regulations that municipalities and the states have to follow in regards to small wireless facilities. So there are some things that are the same, but the federal government set forth specific rules for small cells. And then codified some of these rules, like new shot clock rules, so shorter time periods, restrictions on fees, restrictions on aesthetic regulations, all sorts of different things. So that's why we're here.
Industry-friendly regulations.
Every
Well,
single
and it's
one of them.
funny, because the industry was not completely satisfied with that ruling, so they challenged it as well. So now it's being challenged by all sides, and it's in the 10th Circuit at this time.
But is the basis, to Sheila's point, is the basis for the regulation still on need?
Yes.
So if you have 3G, you have 4G, they're just elevating it, so everyone has to have the latest, so we all have to have 5G?
Yeah, so the United States was actually behind the times when it came to this technology. We're getting beat by South Korea, who was doing great
And so
things
who-
with this.
So I never called
So-
it.
So who cares? I mean, you know,
So the FCC established these
I know what-
regulations to eliminate, or at least reduce the obstacles that providers were facing in municipalities to get these facilities established.
so there's
So-
a,
So is need defined in the old way, which was just coverage, or is
Right.
need defined in the new way, which is coverage and capacity as well?
Yeah, so need is actually expanded beyond even that. Need is anything. If there's a gap in coverage, if there's a need to improve service, capacity, connectivity, if they could show that there's any reason for them to be where they want to be, then you don't have much to say. You can work with the providers, we can use aesthetic regulations to guide them to a better facility, but as far as saying, no, you can't be here,
you can't say
we're
that.
very restricted.
We can't say it now, but
So-
it was just interesting that need is being changed and, you know,
Yeah,
it's
gap in
almost like
coverage-
want instead
gap
of
in-
need.
So there's this, this is gonna sound like a digression, but it's not. There's this guy named, businessman, entrepreneur, ended up putting together a great insurance health, company. Geez, now I forgot his name.
Bob?
But,
No,
no.
that's why I'm here.
Kaiser, founder of Kaiser Permanente. He said that in the capitalist society, the way to make $1 million, and that was back when $1 million was real money. He said, if you want to make $1 million, find a need and fill it, right? Things have changed. Now it's create a need and fill it. And the way you create a need is you create wishes and expectations of things that people don't really need. But as a consequence of their expectations, we end up, now that it can be defined as a need. It's like we really didn't need a Whole Foods, but we wanted a Whole Foods, so we got a Whole Foods. And I'm not saying anything bad about Whole Foods. There's a little bit of history in this community.
Yeah, I've been around.
We didn't need a supermarket. We didn't really need one. But in any case, I think to Bob's point, maybe where Bob's going and Sheila also, is that we really, the capabilities of this technology is not needed in residential districts. It's just not. I mean, this is very high-speed stuff that apparently what it means is you can now, with this technology, about all it's going to do for you is for your cell phone, it'll allow you to download a feature-length film in like 5 seconds on your phone. Who needs that? Nobody really needs that. And if we think we need that, then we're in serious trouble. I can understand it in cities where there are other networks that actually could benefit from this kind of technology. You said they're doing great things in Korea. Well, I don't know what defines a great thing in your version of that. I'm sure that there are places where there are real applications, but I understand all of the self-driving cars and the technology they're using is 4G technology.
What?
And, let me just finish.
I'm sorry.
And as I understand it, that technology actually is going to be adequate to do that. Now, I may be wrong, but maybe the 5G is gonna get your car to do things that your car really doesn't need to do. Right? But they're gonna sell it to you because they want to advance the technology. It's because they can sell you something. And so I'm very, very skeptical about this technology being given to us, actually, I think, rammed down our throats because we're being told you can't say no to it, when it has no practical application in our community, or very little practical application, and maybe only in just discrete areas.
Well,
That's my take on it.
It's, it's tough for me to figure out the balance test here in terms of the imposition of this need
Right, what
And
it'll do
then-
to our community, it's where Sheila started this.
Exactly right. So, and you see, now, some of these pictures are really very alarming when you look through this. It's
There's
just
all sorts of
astounding.
different types of small self-facilities. And they could have ground-mounted equipment, they could have other equipment, on the pole, they could be above the pole.
So we can't say no, so what can we say no to?
So we can encourage them to pick better locations, we can promote aesthetic regulations as far as stealthing and color and, things like that. And
I'm sorry, you said encourage. Can we command them to pick a different location?
ultimately, you cannot command them.
So if a lot of these installations might end up on utility poles, who
Yes.
owns the utility poles?
Those are usually owned by private entities.
So these utility poles that are owned by private entities but are in the town's right-of-way, these private entities are forced to accept the 5G equipment
No,
on their utility poles?
no, they're not forced to.
Okay.
But they'll probably get paid for it.
Correct. And the town can get paid as well for these facilities, even if they're on a private pole in the public right-of-way. The FCC said that you can charge reasonable fees, and they set forth regulations as to what fees are reasonable and establish presumptively reasonable fees, which, according to the FCC, that's $270 per year per facility. Now, if you can justify more than that, then you can charge that, but the fees you charge have to represent what your costs are for maintaining the right of way.
How about a way to justify it is that if you go to where the hype is for all this, it's $1 trillion technology that's gonna generate huge amounts of revenue.
And this is a huge aspect of the
Could
challenge,
we get
and
some of that, more than $270 a year?
if we can justify, higher fees, we can do that.
And
But it's
270
a huge aspect of the challenge, and I know I said it was in the 10th Circuit, it got moved to the 9th Circuit, so if you're looking for it, it's currently pending in the 9th Circuit, this litigation.
But it's interesting too, because in a town where we're still challenged with the coverage need, and we still haven't met that, hence we have the homeland antenna.
So you
It,
think,
it's staggering to think about, given the texture of our town, the geography of our town, the number of poles that we would need to have coverage in 5G, because we are hills and valleys and swamps, and, I mean, we have a lot of cell towers now, but we still don't have coverage. I mean, to get 5G coverage in this town, this is just gonna be incredible. The numbers are staggering. Is there anything in the regulation in terms of, a maximum burden for a town? Is there a per capita measurement or something like this in terms of the number of facilities that they can
Number of
impose?
applications that we'd have to process.
There is not.
To put all these carriers on all these
In
poles.
fact, they encourage batching, which
Batching.
would be multiple applications in multiple facilities in one application submission.
Oh, joy.
Times the 4
I'm sorry.
carriers that are present in our town.
Yeah.
It's astonishing,
I missed
really.
that loud, forgive me. What did you just say?
One of the things talked in the, and I'm sorry, I point to my binder because I have the ruling in here if anyone wants any specific provisions, but one of the things they talk about in the ruling is batching applications and how, you can submit a batch application, which is one application with multiple facilities in it.
So they could, one application for the whole town?
Could come in with 100 different, those little pole things.
I think we can strongly discourage that, and we have reasons to say that these have to be reviewed separately.
Sure.
I think, we have a strong argument, but if they wanted to come in and, but I think we'd have a strong argument to say, 100 facilities in one application is unacceptable. Maybe you do, would have to be designated to a specific area or, a very specific site. We have that power.
Okay, we have that power.
Can we answer a baseline question, though, about whether our poles, which are already laden with wires, whether they can support the weight of these new technologies that are proposed to go on utility poles to a large extent?
So one of the application requirements is that they need to demonstrate that the support structure they're putting their small cell on can maintain the weight of that equipment. Beyond that, looking at it from an engineering standpoint as to whether that report is accurate is the best we
I
can
mean,
do.
you
Is there-
drive around and you see the poles, tilting over to the side, and you get a heavy rain, and the soil softens up, and those poles tilt a little bit more under the weight.
Would we have the ability to test that? In other words, the actual engineering and design, for storms and various winds, like we have certain building codes that are designed for certain winds and that kind of stuff? That would be interesting to take a look at, because I don't think our poles are very much good for over 25 miles an hour around here in some cases. In fact, every
And then they
single.
come, and they when one cracks, they come and they lash together a
2x4 on it.
secondary pole.
It's just incredible.
So and
Well, that's a public safety issue. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to me that we would have some sort of traction on public safety.
I've thought that
Wow.
this is the problem you're talking about, which is what's bringing those poles down are all the cables. It's not the electricity. It's
No,
all
no.
the cables that are going to people's
Internet
homes.
and cable,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Goes to my house. This is technology which is going to have this high-speed capability. I don't know about the amount of demand that it can satisfy. I mean, it goes fast, but how much can it actually do, right? Saturate an area, these boxes, and how much data can it get out? Is this technology going to the point where it's going to supplant cable, and we'll have a box in our house that's going to be getting TV and getting Wi-Fi and getting internet off of this technology and no longer have cables?
That is a potential option for the future. I don't know how long it would take to get to that point, or if that's where technology is going.
Where it is now, there's a lot of people that do not have cable
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
Or phones.
Or phones.
But if
or
the stuff works so fast, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to me that this.
Yeah, there was mention of 10G at the conference. Jen
I
Napoli and
will
both
tell you
attended.
though, given the way, there have been studies that given, if for example, you've got 4 teenagers in a house, and again, a 14 or teenager household isn't as common, but there's issues on standard networks right now with being able to keep up with the use with all of the equipment
I
attached.
think the real issue is parental control.
Well,
Just me.
well, of course, but
and
that's
school.
what they're,
Yes,
at,
too.
yeah, it's school.
Kids do their homework on computers using
Everything is
Wi-Fi.
Google
Everything.
Share.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
so if you've got 3, 4 kids in the house trying to do their homework, all trying to use the same network at the same time, there's,
Is this a problem you have with your 4-year-olds?
no, this I know.
Not yet.
Just think, we'll be able to watch,
They
Precocious,
don't even
aren't
have
they?
tablets yet.
we'll be able to watch Gone with the Wind in 2 minutes.
You know, I've already seen it.
Just compress it. But do you want to touch on some of the hallmarks of some of the changes in the laws?
Sure.
We had this wonderful discussion of technology, which we're all very adept at.
So I just want to go back to the town's definition of these facilities, breaking them down into major and minor. Majors go to special permit review. Minors just go for site plan review. So that's currently how it's broken down in the code. And the
So that has
minor.
a big impact in terms of the secret review.
Correct. Minor facilities don't have extra regulations in the code. So what we did is we eliminated those definitions. There's no more minor and major facilities. We now have small wireless facilities, which is a codified definition by the federal government. So we took that definition and we put it in our town code. And we have non-small wireless facilities, which would be everything else. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a tower, but if it doesn't meet the size restrictions of a small wireless facility, then it goes to special permit review. If it falls within the definition of small wireless facility, it's just going to be reviewed by the planning board. And then it's within your discretion whether you want a public hearing, and then you look at the regulations set forth in the code under section 410 for the small wireless facilities.
And the review by the planning board is a small.
Small wireless facility and a site
permit
plan.
And site plan.
Yes.
So there's this new category of approval, a small wireless facility permit that the planning board would be reviewing.
And how do
In addition to the
how do
site
the new shot clocks work? I mean, how much more compressed is it?
Very. So, shouldn't say that so aggressively, but it's fast.
When you receive an application, you have 10 days to deem it complete,
It's like this.
and that's 10 calendar days.
There
So-
might not even be a
5G
planning board
applications,
meeting
though.
in those 10 calendar
So that has to
days.
come to the town, and they have to look at it and say, okay, does this look like it has everything it needs off the bat? If not, they advise the applicant goes off and gets whatever they need to get, and they resubmit. And the shot clock starts at 0 upon resubmittal.
But think of the burden this places on town staff.
But you guys have to turn this around immediately. So
Yeah,
make
I
a
mean, you have to
determination.
drop, and
Well, we have to do
consultants.
it, we have to do it now too, but just to give you an example.
But then you'll have dozens and dozens of these
Yes, and we get
applications.
applications and we're sending them out to the RF frequency guy, to the visual guy, and they get back to us typically within 5 days. We get that comment letter, they say it's incomplete, we send it to the applicant and we say, you gotta fulfill this. As town staff right now are reviewing the application, because that's not the only thing we're focusing on. And so what I am concerned with is the fact that they're now working to address the RF guys, and they're gonna submit applications, and we haven't even gotten ours out the door yet. Even though the clock has stopped based on their review, we can't set it aside, we have to keep on working.
I
Yeah,
think this is
and then
extraordinarily burdensome.
that's just the-
Because it's not just one tower, now it'll be 100 of these 5G, small cell wireless facilities.
If we go to public hearings, it also becomes a burden on the public as well. I
So-
mean, you
so
just have to
this-
be here every night just in case something comes up.
Would this be a site plan review?
Well,
That shot clock is just not
That's one of the, approvals.
So how do you,
In this proposed local law, that's
crazy.
what's being proposed right
understood,
now.
so this is, how do you do a site plan of a bunched array of, say, 30 of these things on poles around town? What does that site plan actually look like, and what are we addressing when we look at that site plan? What are you supposed to say about it?
I guess
What
either-
detail is it? I mean,
30 over town, you probably have to have multiple site plans specific to each site.
one
which is
site plan for
Well,
each
maybe-
pole.
Or it's, I mean, the way I've
An
seen
area
it in some communities is, you can either have multiple sheets, right, showing
Yeah,
each one,
that's-
or because there's such a small area involved, you have, on one sheet, you may have 6.
like a neighborhood or
Sites.
something?
Yeah, but what I would recommend is to say a site plan or area plan as, I would expand that, because we want, if it's an array, let's take Greeley. They're putting them in downtown in the Chappaqua Hamlet. I'd wanna see a plan that lays out that whole area and then focuses on each tower and how, or each installation, how that will be treated. So the planning board gets a package that shows the area-wide impact of the array, or the site area plan, versus the individual pole plan.
So, but in that review, I mean, our reviews are normally stormwater and trees, and they're like 4 things. In that review of that application, what are we actually reviewing for?
We're gonna end up reviewing aesthetics, and that was one of my comments, is that we really need to make sure that we're pushing the envelope as to what we require aesthetically. In looking at the SeaTac, there's some beautiful towers when it comes to camouflaging them. I saw some most ugly installations when I was surfing the internet as to what can happen. And so I would want this versus something else. And a lot of times, we struggle with our tower applicants. Oh, well, that technology doesn't really work, and it's a fight
Yeah,
getting them to show you.
Absolutely.
And I think in this instance, I think that the visual impact is going to be the number one issue with these, how it relates to the other areas. And there may be an electricity generation issue.
Yeah,
And is it
Power.
safe to say too that if they're gonna go onto existing poles, our aesthetic ability to review that is completely different than if they're putting in a new pole?
Correct, and so we
Yes.
will need structural analysis.
Yep.
We will need visual analysis, structural analysis, and, kind of for every installation.
Do we have very often when we have our cell tower applications now, we hear about people's concerns about health
Yes.
and the RF issues. Do we know what this technology does in terms of,
Radio
these and
frequency.
those rays and what it does to us?
We are preempted from doing anything about health. The federal government has very standards that regulate any health impacts, there are very specific RF emission requirements that they have to meet.
If they
So
fall within those,
they have
we're
to fall.
preempted.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we can't, and when these applications are going to come before you, there will be people to make comments about health concerns. And, we respect those, but there's nothing we can do about them. And you cannot deny an application because of the fear of health implications. We don't have that ability. We can
Can-
regulate for aesthetics, but not for health.
For administrative purposes, can we set up internal rules whereby we would say, look, we want you to send in your applications, Mr. whatever company you are, but you're going to have to do it by neighborhood or district. Don't come in here with scattered all over the place. We need to look at these things in an integrated fashion in a restricted area. So is it something that staff can say, look, this is what our application, this is the way we handle it here in this town. Happy to help you and to look at these, but you really have to do it in this kind of an organized fashion. I just think if they come in scattered and we have different carriers coming in at different places all over, because the co-location is not going to be an issue or something we can require. It seems to be on a telephone pole. Pole is going to collapse.
Yep.
So I have this image that we're going to have, whatever it is, 4 or 5 carriers who are left
It's gonna be-
coming in all different parts of town and just being, bombarded with these things once it starts.
Well, and maybe there's something that we can codify that says, if co-location comes in and is deemed that the tower is not adequate, that that the structural analysis will dictate whether or not it's replaced in total.
So let me ask you, let me ask you, because when we get these cell tower applications, we go out and get consultants to help us review it, right?
Those consultants that we don't have on staff.
Right, exactly. The technical guys who
Yes.
know this
The
stuff.
RF guy, a radio
Or
frequency guy.
So maybe, I think to Bob's point, maybe we can preempt some of this by adopting some standards. These are the.
Review standards, application standards.
Find the ones we like and say, this is what you can do in our town. Just get it out there.
Well, I have a
And
question.
put together, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not only just visual standards, but if there are any other standards that our technical consultants can offer us to put into, I don't know whether it ends up actually in legislation, in a code that says that these are the standards you need to meet. But at least it's a message out to the applicants that you come in with this, or, don't come in.
Guidelines.
I have two questions.
You can't say don't come in, but
Yeah,
if
two
you want to make it
questions.
easy, go ahead.
One is with the stealth poles that I had pictures of and that Drew has brought pictures of tonight, they're poles that are light poles with the integrated 5G small cell facility. But our poles in town are poles that carry wires. So are there stealth poles that are designed to carry wires as well, so that if we look at something and say that's structurally unsound and it needs to be replaced, can it be replaced with a stealth pole that's designed to carry wires as well as hide or to the best of ability, camouflage the small cell technology? That's question number one. And question number two is, to Tom's point about guidelines, when I was looking around the internet, I found guidelines from the city of Pittsburgh, a 13-page document that talked about their requirements for their small cell facility installations. I don't, are they legal under the law? Can you do that? Is it a good set of guidelines?
We should research this from a legal point of view.
Should we take a look at it and see if there's anything in there that we would like to consider
As
for
well as
our
a technical
town?
point of view.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? At the conference that Drew mentioned that she and I attended last week, that one of the industry folks that were speaking on the panel said that's what they're really looking for from municipalities. Give us a 1 or 2 page or 3 page, however many page sheet
Tell us how to
that
do it.
tells us what do you want, so that we can try the best that we can to conform our application to what you want, and that'll help.
Replace the poles, the double poles.
I know, right?
On the poles,
That's what they're looking
on the
for,
poles,
industry.
if we make
I
these,
know,
I
it's
found it, it
I'm
was
being
interesting to
facetious.
me, but,
Yeah.
if we make the assumption that they're gonna try
let
to
somebody
go
else
on
who knows
existing
about this take a look
poles,
at it and see if it's a
and we
good set of
determine
guidelines.
structurally that existing pole can't carry it, but the applicant doesn't own the pole, let's say Con Ed owns the pole, you can't make Con Ed replace the pole, can
Exactly.
we?
No.
So by default, if a pole can't carry this stuff, they may have to then go look for another place
Well, they
Because-
will, they put on a building, something like this.
Well, but the landlord doesn't have to let them put it on their building, right?
Well, I think we should do, like, as we do with our current regulation, set, standards in terms of preferences where we'd like to see them. So, for example, we do that now, we like to co-locate, we put on public property, water towers, things that belong to the town. Then we go into industrial, whatever that, we have that order.
Right.
Yeah, so that's actually in this law, I restructured the locational priorities. So you'll see on page 12, I broke it down, the town has 3 districts. You have your industrial district, 3 categories of districts: industrial, business, and residential. And so my thinking was, the first priority in Newcastle would be co-location in an industrial district. And then, it goes down from there, so that the last priority would be in the residential district on private property.
But that's going to be, unfortunately, probably one of the top priorities for the companies to put them in the residential areas, because that's where we all live.
And just because it doesn't meet this priority list, you can't say, well,
Yeah.
we're not gonna allow you here, but
But they have to
this,
demonstrate that
they
they
have to
tried all of the
demonstrate
other-
that they tried these locations, that they looked for sites that fall within this
We
priority
can write
list.
that, but is the FCC going to support, because these guys come in and right now doing the towers, we try and jawbone them because we have no real authority.
Yeah, the last tower went in a residential district in somebody's backyard.
So, what,
I see it every day.
what I've seen
And
in
my
other,
cell phone doesn't work in my house.
what I've seen,
Travesty of it all.
That's what really is the travesty of it.
No, they blocked you out of spite because they
So frustrating.
what we saw in other
So you need that 5G.
in other municipalities that have these locational priorities and are dealing with small cells, there is one with a similar restriction that you have to demonstrate that you looked at other facilities that meet the city's standards. And what happened was they provided a chart that showed exactly, where they were looking, why they come up with a service area, and then in that service area, they look at, sites that could potentially work. And then they go through this chart and say, okay, well, this, the private entity that owns this pole wouldn't let us on there, and this site doesn't work because it's blocked by a hill. And they go through the list and explain why those sites don't work.
But
So
first and foremost, somebody has to say yes to them, right?
someone has to say yes.
So
to that.
they're gonna be out there talking to all these different pole owners or building owners or wherever they wanna try and mount their equipment. They have to get people to say yes first.
Yes.
I have a crazy question. Can a person put a pole up on their property for them privately?
A residence in a residential district?
Well, that would be part of, so that support structure is part of the small wireless facility, and so they'd have to get approval.
So if somebody wanted to, if they couldn't get it on the poles in the street because the poles couldn't carry it, some neighbor could, come over to my house and build it here?
So part of the
They need
proposed local
270
law
Well,
is amendments to the schedule of uses
Okay.
to, because currently in most of the residential districts, you're allowed as an accessory use a separate structure for the purpose of supporting antennas other than wireless telecommunication facilities, provided it's necessary, efficient, blah, 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 blah. There's a provision in the residential district currently, and that's being amended to allow any equipment serving or being used in conjunction with wireless telecommunication facilities and located on the same property or lot as the wireless telecommunications facility. So, in other words, it would be allowed accessory use in a residential district.
And that's one of the
To a
amendments.
specific height, to a specific height?
The height is dealt with within the text of the law, within the regulations.
Actually, I had a little trouble understanding that because it seemed to be a little vague.
The height?
The height.
So the reason for that is because small cells have a specified height in their definition. So you have to meet the height of the definition of small cell, or you are then a non-small cell, and then you have different height requirements.
So, as I recall, anything below 50 feet is small cell, and then above that, it's a tower. But are you saying that it's up to the 5G provider to determine whether they need a 40-foot pole, a 50-foot pole? a 60-foot pole to put their small cell technology on?
No, they have to, if they want to install a small cell facility, it has to be below 50 feet.
It has to be
Or there's also a 10%,
the non-substantial
No, they
variation.
They can
It-
put it on a higher tower,
could
but
put
then
it
it
on a
falls
higher-
under the other regulations at all.
yes, then it would be a non-small cell, and we have different height restrictions,
Right.
because that's not regulated by the FCC.
Okay, so then going back to the 50-foot limitation, is it the provider who determines the height that they need? It's not Newcastle that says, well, you can do 35 feet in a residential district, but in an industrial district, you could do a 50-foot pole.
Right, it's not Newcastle, it would be the provider, and then.
And is that determined by the federal overlay?
Yes, well, the federal law, yes. And the rule, though, in this law, we state that you have to show why the facility is the height it is. So that maybe we can get them to try and,
Yeah, but we tried that once and they said, oh, that's proprietary information, we can't share it with you.
well, it has to be part of their site plan. I mean, in this law, it says you have to demonstrate the height of the
I understand that,
facility.
but I sat out here and listened to the guy say that's proprietary, I
telling you.
can't share that information with you, you have to trust us.
See, we've been through this.
We've been through it.
Many times, and it's, I find it very frustrating, because there is the federal prerogative that makes it really, really difficult, and we can write all the legislation and all the codes we want. But the FCC has their rules and their regulations, and these guys have come in and say, yeah, okay, but, this is the way we have to do it, this is the way we want to do it, this is the technology, and if you want to locate this box, instead of you want it here, move it 10 feet over there, okay, we'll do that. But that's about it. You want it to look like a tree instead of a teaspoon, fine, we'll make it a tree or a teaspoon, but we're still going to put the tower here. And as I remember, I thought I read recently that actually there was a new regulation that said that communities can no longer ask these cell tower builders to come in and demonstrate need by coverage. That is no longer required.
Right, they don't have to demonstrate.
So-
That goes to the need could be so much more than just coverage, there's, the FCC stated that there is a need for these facilities.
No, I'm
so-
talking about a 4G, I'm talking about
The
towers.
3G and 4Gs.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about so we've even lost that in the old technology, and we're not getting in the new technology. Is there I sometimes, well, I worry a lot about everything, but I worry sometimes about when this technology changes, all this hardware that's sitting around. And there's a big investment in putting this stuff up, but is there actually the promise that when the technology is superseded by something more efficient or something different, that this infrastructure will be taken out?
So it's in the legislation as well. We have
there a
provisions
bond?
for, there's not a bond.
Well, how do we, okay.
It
So-
would be, so you could write them up, they're supposed to take it down if it's abandoned, if there's any violations, for all these different reasons. They will then be instructed to remove their facility, and they have to do it within a certain time frame. And then there's penalties involved if they fail to follow, because it's a violation of the zoning
But
code.
how would the town ever collect up that penalty if there's no bond to guarantee their performance of removing the
You'd have to
equipment
sue.
once it's obsolete?
Yeah, you have to.
Well, I guess the question is, can a bond be imposed? Is that something that we could put in our legislation? Is that prohibited by FCC regulations?
It's not prohibited by the FCC, it's not addressed in their ruling.
Then it's
So
not
we
prohibited.
could end up getting pushback from providers. It is something that we could introduce and see, and see how, we could look into it.
What about regulations
but if
on
it's
maintenance?
not-
Never mind just removal, but regular maintenance. We've all seen what
If the
happens to our
FCC
infrastructure.
doesn't speak to it, can the provider, they can push back all they want, but if there's no FDC backing them, can't we
So-
say you
Yeah.
do a bond or walk away?
I think the
The only
concern is like a
reason-
perpetual bond, basically, so a bond that gets posted and the money is just literally
Well, it's a
sitting there
maintenance bond that
forever.
guarantees that they're going to maintain these
So I
things
think,
too.
Well, the
I
bond-
think what we would need to look at is if there's a legal prohibition against literally a perpetual,
Right.
never-ending bond.
And my concern, just offhand, is that the FCC is very clear about what type of fees municipalities can impose. And while this is a bond, the providers may try to argue that this exceeds the reasonable fees that the FCC said were acceptable. This is something else that we're paying for, that's not okay. That's similar with escrow fees. There's a provision in here that, you know, we will collect escrow fees to pay for all our the town will pay for all its consultants. You might get pushback that that's beyond the scope of reasonable fees that the FCC said was acceptable. But it's something that the town does for all applicants that we feel is reasonable to put in this law as well.
The other thing that's in the law is, so if the wireless facility permit holder or the property owner is ordered to take the material, take the hardware, the infrastructure down, and they don't take it down, the town can go in and take it down themselves and then charge either the permit holder or the property owner the costs of that and attach it to the tax bill as a lien.
So does that mean that the town, if there's an obsolete Con Ed pole sitting here in town somewhere, that the town can go and take that pole down?
This is with respect to small wireless facilities
Okay, so
specifically.
there's no precedent for that in our current code? You're instituting a new precedent.
No, I mean, this is a concept that's throughout the code and just a concept in municipal law generally, that if there's statutory authority for the municipality to go in and do the work when the owner
Like a
has been
self-cure.
ordered to do it and hasn't done it, and it's a safety issue or some other, imminent danger.
So what we're putting-
Municipality can go in, do the work themselves, charge back the owner, attach it to the
Okay.
property tax bill as a lien, and get repaid that way.
Okay, right.
Yep.
Now, define owner for me. Does that mean like a utility? Like Con Ed,
Real
for
property,
example,
so the
FCC?
things that you would tax, so the property that the municipality would be taxing under real property taxes.
So just
So
say-
not,
just
not
make-
Con Ed, no, I mean,
You
unless.
couldn't take a Con Ed pole
Not a
out.
pole, no, because that's in the right of way. So the fee owner is the town there. Con Ed doesn't pay taxes to, real property taxes.
And what does
to the
taxation
town.
have to do with the safety issue? I'm sorry, I'm lost.
Because that's how the costs get recouped by the town,
That's for the enforcement of it.
right, for the
Through
enforcement.
taxation.
So, town tells the owner, you need to take this infrastructure off your property.
Just say Con Ed. Right, because owners,
But
I
it's-
want to know
it's
about
not-
the, I'm just.
Yeah, so it doesn't apply necessarily in the Con Ed pole right-of-way. This mechanism would not apply in the Con Ed.
So why would it
utility
apply
pole
to
right-of-way.
small wireless? If they're mounted on Con Ed poles, it doesn't apply to them.
They're not, this would not necessarily apply within the right-of-way. So this is if it's on a private property, is how this mechanism would work.
Okay, and my guess is that that's going to be very few of these.
It's not, yeah, it's not something that the town would ever want to resort to.
Well, no, but if it has to, I mean, no.
If
but-
it has to,
but
we
if-
have
if-
the tool in there.
Right.
Right.
I could see most of them going up on poles.
I still don't understand the Con
Yeah.
Ed issue, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Because everybody else does apparently, so. Okay.
I do want to add one more complication to all this.
Sure.
There are three categories. There are your
Just one
small wireless facilities, your non-small cell wireless facilities, and then there are eligible facilities requests, which is anything that does not make a substantial change to the existing facility. So if they're going to, so let's say they install a small wireless facility and it's 4G capable, and they want to then come in and install a new, very similar, practically the same, small wireless facility that's for 5G,
Replacement or?
a replacement. It will potentially be an eligible facilities request. And the FCC has said that you cannot deny those requests. They have to be approved.
Okay.
So, under this law, those go right to the building inspector for his
So it's a building
issuance.
department issue.
It's a building department issue.
Okay,
This is like
Their
really,
lobbyists did a good job.
yeah. So, for example, in the old Reader's Digest building, we had antenna on the building itself. Way back, maybe it was 2G back then, I don't know what it was. But if they pull those off and just put new ones on, the new technology, it would just go to the building department, that would be it.
As long as it didn't make a substantial change, and substantial change, eligible facilities request is a defined term, so is substantial change. And this is found in the Spectrum Act. Just look it up.
this is when I asked
And
myself.
this was actually not part of the FCC's third report and order adopted in September. Eligible facilities requests have been a thing for a while.
I feel like there's like nothing we can, this is when I ask myself, well, what would Eddie Haskell do? Because I'm at that point. Right, Beef?
Who's Eddie Haskell?
Okay, Ward.
These girls probably don't.
You would be
I know.
Nick at Night.
Yeah, and actually, the explanation, if they don't know Eddie Haskell, the explanation isn't gonna make it any clearer.
Okay, well,
So, I mean, we have, very limited abilities, but I think we have come up with maybe a couple of kernels in here that we ought to investigate in terms of safety issues and maintenance issues, perhaps bonding issues, how we do the application, coming up with some sort of guidelines in terms of what we would like to see.
Yeah, we'll look at Pittsburgh's as well, I
Well,
have
I
not seen
think the
those.
Pittsburgh guidelines that I was looking at were just aesthetics in terms of what they wanted these things to look like when
That's a
they were
good
in
start.
schools.
That's good.
But, then there are all other kinds of
Sure.
conditions too.
yeah, now this would be a burden on our staff. Would also probably be involving you to be sure that what we're coming up with has some legal sound foundation. So I don't know whether, Sabrina? I don't double task when I'm listening to you. So I guess I would ask you whether, for you to assess what kind of effort it would take to put together the kinds of documents we're talking about, and find some way to, or can we help you approach the town board to get support for that? Because I suspect it's an effort.
It is an effort, and I would say, we require applicants to provide escrow when they make application, and maybe the key here is to really making sure that this escrow covers the professionals we would need. In the sense of the,
In-house or out-house? I mean,
well,
outside.
we don't have out-house, and until we start to see the workload with this, we're civil service, getting new positions and contracts and
Right.
things is a long-term thing.
No, I'm talking about consultants. I would suggest, this would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
You could, one, I think, could project that what's coming down the road is going to be onerous.
Correct.
And that it's going to be onerous not just in staff and legal counsel, but it's going to be onerous with respect to outside consultants that the town is going to have to hire every time one of these things comes through.
Correct.
And it might be a wise investment of funds to get ahead of this, to put these things in place instead of having to redo it over and over again.
Well, and that is fair enough, and I can tell you, the town board hired a traffic consultant, and that traffic consultant, they feed projects to as they need to. In the same vein, we have wireless professionals that we go to every time we get a tower, that, we contact them, and the last one was a couple years ago, and because we were previous clients, they help us and review our applications. It's happening now with.
Thought he retired.
He gave us a reference to another guy who was happy to take the work, and he responded within 3 days.
So maybe we can hire somebody like that to get ahead of this game and make it more efficient downstream.
Well, absolutely, and we have those professionals on staff now. It's a matter of, making sure we have the adequate escrow and in the fee schedules to make sure we can cover their costs if we're moving at.
Yeah, especially at accelerated schedule
Accelerated
now,
rate,
so
yeah.
they're gonna need more fees. And you're probably gonna have
I'm so short.
other communities competing for those consultants, because I have to guess if they come into
Well, I guess-
Newcastle, they're going to Mount Pleasant, and they're going to Yorktown,
Sure,
because
they're
they have to keep
everywhere.
it going.
I guess I'm suggesting something else. You're saying wait till an application comes in and then you use the fee in order to hire this person?
Oh, no,
To
no,
activate
no,
this person?
no, typically, we have these consultants right now that we go to
They're your
regarding
list.
specialties.
It's a list.
It's a list.
Right.
When we get an application, we go to our frequent vendors. There's not a huge world.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm sorry. It's late. I'm saying that, I understand you have a go-to list. What I'm suggesting is don't wait for the first application to go to that list. If it takes a fee, collection of a fee to pay that person, then I think we're already behind the game. I'm suggesting something different. Maybe we go to the town board and say, out of your general fund, find let's get ahead of this now.
get our guidelines going now.
Like I don't know who's paying for it.
Oh, you want the guidelines created?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I thought that's what we were talking
Sure,
about.
I think that would be.
I was with application review.
Yeah, I don't know.
We
that
were in application.
No,
That's all
because
part of it.
I
Your
don't
cell
know
phone.
that we need
It's all
like
part
the
of it.
RF consultant to help us create the guidelines. I think that's something between your board and the town board and staff that, I mean, you guys know what you want in your community more than, the RF consultant.
Right,
that-
right. I
RF
think the guidelines are really more the aesthetics.
Right.
Right, exactly.
You want an
but-
outside
And
consultant,
that's what,
Tom? Is that what you're saying? To come up with the guidelines for the?
No, not to come up with the guidelines, but every time there are always technical considerations in anything we do. I can look at something and say, yeah, I like that, and then the applicant comes in and says, well, that doesn't work, and if we put these guidelines together and they don't work, it's just a waste of time. I'm not saying that the consultant would come up with all this stuff for us, but we need advice in doing this. And if we're tying that to a fee structure which is tied to an application, then it's already too late.
I'm not, that's not what I was saying. I think my biggest concern with the small cell, as I said before, is the visual impact, the aesthetics, how it's being camouflaged, and the structural integrity of where it's being mounted. If there is a direction that is more so than we have in our code today regarding the aesthetic treatment, the camouflaging of the facilities, we need to outline that today. The CTAC, there's a lot of nice options in here for CTAC. That
But
this is
again,
showing.
those are light poles that have integrated 5G small cell technologies on them.
Right.
What we have, though, are these huge Con Ed poles that carry the electrical wires and the cable wires, and those are the poles that they're gonna be probably looking at to put the small cell
If-
facilities onto.
If,
I mean, if we could do that in our downtown, if we could put light poles in our downtowns that had small cell technology, that would be great. But that's probably on our,
Yeah, but Sabrina just had a good point. Can't you make it where you have regulations and guidelines where they can't use existing structures? They have to be new? Or we can't say that? Because that's gonna create a lot of problems when you go on that pole. They gotta do the design, you have to get involved with them, then you said.
That's
you
what
have no
Tom's talking about.
recourse.
That's what we need
that's
help
what-
on.
Then you have no
Yes,
recourse.
thank you.
Then you have no recourse.
Yeah.
We have to take it down. It's gonna create so many
But
problems.
I think there's more than just the aesthetics. I think we can
Yes.
think about that ourselves. It's the weight bearing, the size, the wind resistance,
structural
those kinds of these structural issues.
Who's gonna do it? Who's gonna review
So
it?
that's
Who's gonna
that
sign
is
off
Well,
on
who's
it?
gonna set up the guidelines
who's
for
gonna
it?
set up the guidelines for
And
it?
then we
There's
use those
light
presumably
poles
for
And the
review.
capacity of their light poles with the
Yeah.
So
town.
who would set up those guidelines?
So
Would it
that
be
should be a
an engineer?
planning
Would it?
board request.
I,
of the
I
town
guess,
board to
I guess I
pursue
have to write down
relations.
what I think we need here, because it's more, to me, it's more than just what it looks like and whether the
Yes.
pole can hold it up. There's a lot more in this legislation
In those two
that is
items.
being addressed in those two items. And I think that this board, I think, and the town board, I think, ought to get ahead of this thing with respect to telling the applicant, as he comes in, this is the document, not just the legislation, but this is a document that is going to guide you in the same way that we have a zoning code, the same way that we have design standards.
Yeah.
Not just those two items.
And I actually don't know
20 things.
I don't know everything that's gonna be in it, because I'm not a technical person on this subject, but I certainly think we need advice on that, to see what should be in it.
For a consultant to come up with that. That makes sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're
That
looking
makes
for.
sense.
Yep.
And I do want, I know you just got this, there are aesthetic regulations in here already. So for some fun nighttime reading, you could take a look through and it might help you think of what more you'd like to see.
Yep.
Or what you think is not necessary for Newcastle that maybe you'd prefer to see struck out and replaced with something different.
So-
But we did touch upon those in this draft.
So do you see no need in getting a technical review of this legislation?
That is not my call, but just
but I'm-
personally, I don't think that there is a need for a technical review. I think between, discussions with the planning board and the town board and staff, we can come up with aesthetic regulations. Because the more technical things are governed by the federal government. And so there are strict standards that have to be met. So it's important to have those consultants at the ready so that they can confirm that what's submitted meets those standards.
So you take as a model for the technical aspects of this, the federal regulations, because you can't go against those. So it's essentially the baseline for all that stuff.
Right.
And they're that broad that they speak to so many different of these issues that we've been talking about tonight.
Right.
Okay, fair
But,
enough.
you know, what's important for Newcastle to step up and do is set some strict aesthetic regulations that provide clear guidelines for these providers to come in and achieve.
Well, that's great. Maybe it starts, I don't know, Sabrina, maybe we don't, I mean, maybe it's just having a technical person who really knows this stuff come in and give us a presentation, have a conversation with them, so that we get a third party in here telling us, you know, what's possible and where the future's going and so on, so that we can at least get a start on this.
And I don't believe that this is the end of the line for this draft. We're obviously going to revise this and change this draft, but then even once it's adopted and the technology is changing, I think it's important that we pay attention to what's going on to be responsive to amend the code as needed.
So what is the task at this point in the schedule? Where is the town board on this? Where are you guys on it? What are we supposed to be doing? Who are the other boards or commissions in town that will be looking at this as well? How is that working?
The
What do we
town
do?
board scheduled a public hearing for April 30th. So that's when they'll be opening their public hearing. So you'll have at least one more meeting before the public hearing is open.
Right.
I don't know, you know, if it's gonna be one public hearing and then they're gonna close it and adopt it same night. My guess is that there's gonna be a lot of discussion about this. So, you know, if you need more than just your next meeting to discuss this.
Well, I don't think we have answers here tonight, but
Yeah.
perhaps we could put together a memo that throws out the questions that we've discussed a little bit tonight.
Yeah.
Just so that they're thinking about it and we make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for them as they open their
Yeah, I
public
think so,
hearing
too.
to have the questions that you've raised.
Is the public hearing, or it's already scheduled for April 30th?
April
Yes.
30th, yes.
And if you have any questions, you know, feel free to email them to myself or Jen, and we can, you know, do our best to, you know, respond or
Yeah.
research answers.
Okay.
Well, I have a quick question. So in a lot of these pictures, there's more of a box recharge versus the bag recharge. Aesthetically, the box recharge is more stealth than the bag recharge. Can we as a town say preference is box recharge versus bag recharge?
I don't think I'm at that position. I don't know what all the
I'm
alternatives
just,
are.
I'm throwing, what I'm throwing out is, can we say that?
Be that specific.
Oh, I see what you're
Yeah.
saying. Okay.
Yes, I think we can.
Okay.
As long as you're
Thank
writing
you.
it so
Sorry, I
that if
misunderstood.
they, let's say for some technical reason, they can't do the box recharge, and they can demonstrate to us that that just will not work for that facility, and there is some room to make exceptions, then, and setting forth a specific preference is okay, as long as you have the ability to maybe waive that requirement under certain circumstances.
Yeah, so I think those are more of the aesthetic considerations that we're talking about.
Right.
Because that's a specific type of stealthing that I've seen just by quickly looking through this, that in our residential neighborhoods may be more appropriate. And where we're talking about more commercially dense areas, we may say our first priority is to incorporate a light pole or to replace a pole.
But even if we are, I mean, I have a picture of what it looks like when it's not stealth, and it's really
It's
unattractive.
hideous, yes.
So even if we're doing it on a utility pole, I think we would still want to require
I am
some
saying-
sort of stealth shrouding. because-
Absolutely, yes. But our selection, instead of a stealth square downtown, there may be other features that we want to enhance downtown that they can work towards.
Well, these are specific, I think, the kinds of questions that we have to get to you guys, and then we can get that to the town board and have it at least considered as we look at this changed law.
And the only thing that
And the safety of.
I
the
agree, safety is-
Safety.
that I'd say, last thing to say for me is that we're not the first group of 8 people, 10 people to sit around and talk about this. there's plenty of people, communities who are wrestling with this, and if we could find some way to get the metadata together to find out who's doing what, where, and how they're handling it, I think there are some of them who are farther down the road, like Pittsburgh, than we are.
I can send you the link, I can send everybody the link for that.
Yeah, we all ought to
that
be doing our
report,
research to
you know,
see
but I'm
what
sure
else is
there are,
out there.
as you say, I'm sure there are a lot of communities. This is just what popped up when I was
There
doing
are?
a little bit.
No, there are. Municipalities in Westchester are all kind of at the same level. Just a little extra background, we worked on this issue in the city of Beacon. They adopted, what? Is it, did I say town? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Beacon Town.
I was just like, what?
Sorry.
Yeah, so we worked on
It's
this in the
late.
city of Beacon. They adopted legislation before the FCC ruling, and then we had to amend it in response to the FCC ruling. We're talking about this issue with Village of Pleasantville, and this is just our firm. Village of Pleasantville, Town of Newcastle, Village of Rybrook, and we worked with the Town of Bedford. They have their code already adopted. That was used, Beacon and Bedford, I kind of used as models. So, you know, that may, if you want to look at Bedford's as well,
But
so.
it's more than just Westchester County, I mean, this is.
Oh, yeah,
It's the
yeah.
whole country on this.
Oh, the whole country.
Apparently
I'm
Korea's
just in New
doing
York right now.
fantastic things.
Yeah.
Field trip.
But there is hope. I just want to, there was a picture, and I'm sorry I didn't print it out, but it was either in California or Nevada. They did stealthing, but they covered it up like a cacti, and so, or cactus, yeah, cactus is singular, just like a cactus, so you couldn't even tell it's there. It looks just like a cactus, so I think there's hope. I think providers are.
Well, we need deer. but
Yeah, we don't
those
need,
with
we
the
don't
deer.
need cacti here, but maybe a deer. I don't know. Or like, ground technology, ground mounting. I've seen mailboxes or benches, you know, there's opportunities in stealthing to really do,
It's the stuff on the telephone poles are having a
It's
hard
stuff-
time to
yeah.
control, and that's where most of them are gonna be.
so,
Okay,
anyway, just
thank you.
late night thoughts.
Thank you
So
very much.
actually, the question on that though, presumably in Nevada or wherever you saw these stealth cacti, they have telephone poles there too. So how did they get their providers to spend the money to put in stealth installations as opposed to mounting it on the existing
You're
poles?
assuming that they didn't mount it on existing poles also.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, how tall
Yeah, I don't
can
know
a
the
cactus
details
be?
behind.
Some big ones.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You gotta assume they always went with cheapest avenue.
Yeah.
Well, true,
Right.
that's a real consideration. I mean, you know, they're gonna go to the least resistant application as possible. And if it is the telephone poles, you know, how can we work out something with Con Edison that will, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just seems like we're put in an awful situation.
Yeah.
I could tell we're.
And I don't know, maybe they just did that,
Gas that can-
the cacti one for show, you know, so they could say, small cells aren't that bad, look what we can do.
Oh, it was the
I didn't look,
demonstration.
I didn't look into the details behind the picture, I just saw it and thought it
Yeah,
was
but you know what they'll do?
interesting.
You know what they'll do? They'll come in with, say, 20, they'll come into the room and they'll say, oh, we met with Con Ed already. They already looked at everything. They approved it structurally.
Exactly.
We are on board with them. We have an agreement with them. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
What do you do then?
Right, so
Exactly.
it's up to the RF and the aesthetic, the sheathing.
You know darn well they're gonna get in cahoots with.
Yeah, of course,
they are.
Con Ed's gonna get
cable
income
companies.
from it.
Of course.
Con Ed, they're gonna make a
Keep them
ton of
alive
money,
for a little bit
and
longer.
that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna be already pre-done, pre-structurally engineered, and they'll say they certified
Yep.
and signed off on it already.
And they'll say every single pole's the same,
That's correct.
Yep.
That's exactly.
because their
what they'll do.
poles are all standardized and they meet
Which
certain
is why
standards.
if they're looking to
they're broken
locate where
down.
we have a double pole situation, we should require the second pole to be removed, and we should be specific as to the stealth technology.
Double wood.
Now, you can really sink your teeth into the
Are there other
aesthetics.
things that are,
Structurally, they'll already have that done.
if
I
you're
guarantee it.
replacing
I guarantee it.
a broken
That's the least of
pole,
their concerns.
are there
Probably
other
good engineering.
materials, other poles
Con
that
Ed
would
poles.
be preferable
That's a great question.
to putting on a new log pole? And can you,
Later, the cables.
when you're replacing a broken pole, can you make the utility put in a different kind of pole?
In my experience, I have seen the utilities put in new poles to serve small cell facilities. So just completely new.
But again.
I
That are
think
carrying the
that's a good
wires
solution either.
and
Town?
carrying the small cell
Would
So
you
do we
really
facilities?
require a new pole?
What happens with
But
Con
why-
Ed? They're gonna turn around and just play the devil's advocate. They say, we went to Con Ed, they say it's fine.
I don't
What do you
know.
do? Just playing the devil's advocate.
What
I
can the
don't-
town do to get a new pole?
But
Yeah,
wait,
what were the circumstances
why
where the
would we
new
want
pole
a new
went
pole?
in?
We already
I
have
think
enough
if the
poles.
existing pole
I
was
mean, not a replacement of an existing pole with a new pole.
With a
Well,
new.
that's
and-
Con Ed then.
Then that's Con Ed. How do we tell
But Drew
Con Ed?
is
to
saying
put
Con
there
Ed to put a
are
new pole.
times
And
when
then I'm
that's
gonna give
happened
you
where
another,
they've
so you're
replaced the
gonna have,
pole.
you're gonna have.
On their
an
own,
old
without the
Con Ed
municipality
pole, and it's
instructing
50
them
feet,
to.
you got a
They've just
brand new
replaced
metal
the pole.
pole, then you got an
With a
old
different
crummy
kind
Con
of
Ed
pole,
pole,
or,
that might even look
With
worse.
the new,
That's
with the
right.
new
Which
regular
has the
pole.
stealth technology incorporated?
No, just a regular new pole.
We're looking for better.
I know.
As opposed to the same old,
I haven't
same
seen
old.
better. They look nice. They're not as fresh wood.
I'm just playing.
Another one of my hobbies.
Sorry to say. You know, you,
It's pathetic, isn't it?
you're my assurance agent. Do you actually ever work for me?
Anyway,
I know.
do we have anything else? Okay, is there a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you very much.